Chapter 65. He lovingly stroked the neck of the white horse and imitated Jiang Pingji's previous actions to comfort the horse. Speaking of which, the horse was quite pitiful. It was a northern warhorse with pure white fur and no other colors. Wuxia had spent a lot of effort to get it back. However, it followed a lousy master and became a horse to pull a carriage. It almost became a common horse. Shang Wanwan sighed. But I think Sister Jingxian and Brother Lanting are really a good match. It was wrong to enter the path of decay at such a young age. The corner of Jiang Pingji's eye twitched. You're playing dumb again. Brother Lanting died young. Sister Lanting is in front of you. Shang Wanwan teased. If I call you sister in front of others, would you dare to agree? At that moment, Jiang Pingji realized that the style of the bullet screen had changed again, and it was a meme she could not understand at all. Badeo President. Etich Wild Monkey, do you dare to answer me if I call you? Lan Chueyu Buja. Etich Wild Monkey, do you dare to answer me when I call you? Cafeteria Dafinanti. Age Stupid Monkey, do you dare to answer me when I call you? The screen was full of ruffians. Jiang Pingji was stunned. How bored were the audience? Other than duplication, what else can you do? She crossed her arms in front of her chest and lifted her eyelids, looking like a scoundrel. I really don't dare to agree. With the help of the horse's height, Shang Wanwan saw that the elegant gathering seemed to have changed its activity. Are they going to play archery and pitch pot? They're just a bunch of useless chickens. What's there to look at? Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and did not hide her disdain. Shang Wanwan nodded seriously. That's true. Brother Lanting is the most heroic and extraordinary. Wanner still wants to walk 2 laps. Seeing that she was going to lead the horse back, Shang Wanwan somewhat shamelessly hugged the horse's neck, looking like she was unwilling to get down. You've become a demon? Jiang Pingji muttered. She had just had this thought. Although the restrictions on women were not too strict now, and they could go shopping or participate in poetry gatherings if they were accompanied, some things could not be done as they pleased. Shang Wanwan was young, so there were more restrictions. Even if she wanted to ride a horse, she could only ride a pony. Now that he was riding on the back of such a tall horse, he only felt that the surrounding air was fresh. Humming a nursery rhyme, the light and cheerful tune made people feel relaxed and happy. Jiang Pingji, on the other hand, had no idea that her appointed accountant had caused some trouble for her. He had embarrassed a few noble sons. Langjun, please take a look. Suku put down his brush. There was a piece of paper on the table. The handwriting on it was thin and powerful, but it was hard to hide its sharpness. Although he was an idiot, he still had some self-restraint. He couldn't do something as uncultured as insulting him. Feng Jin, who was watching the series of events, looked at Suku, who had a humble face but a strong aura. He then looked at the figure who was strolling with a big horse in the distance, who was as small as an ant. He silently took a sip of tea. It was better for him to silently be an audience drinking tea. How did things develop to such a state of mutual hostility? It all started when Shang Wanwan pestered Jiang Pingji to walk the horse. It was not convenient for Suku and Takshu to follow her, so they stayed at the assembly. It seemed that some of the guests had been informed of the true purpose of the assembly by their family elders, and they were waiting to watch a good show. He thought that he would see the other party fuming with anger and embarrassment, but he didn't expect that she wouldn't care about others at all. When they asked her to play poetry, she shamelessly admitted that she was not good at it. When they asked her for other activities, she just looked at them with a dispirited and bored expression. They did not want to continue pestering her, and naturally, they could not watch the good show that they had been waiting for. With such an impenetrable face, they really couldn't do anything to the other party. Then, when they looked away, she brought the daughter of the Shangwan family to walk the horse. The monk could run, but the temple could not to mention that her manservant and servant girl were still there. Lang Jun, who had been unintentionally choked by Jiang Pingji, mocked her in a low voice. His words were vague, but those who knew understood. Suku was not one of them, but he was smart. When he heard those words, he felt that it was not right. Then, someone mocked Jiang Pingji for not knowing literature and had failed to live up to Lu Shi's reputation. How could a noble family produce an illiterate? It would have been fine if that was all, but they felt that it was not enough, so they took it out on Suku. They could not humiliate the master, but it was the same to humiliate the servant. Takshu was a servant girl. Although Jiang Pingji had called them idiots, they had always been good at pretending, so Takshu would not be implicated. So, they were slapped in the face. That was how it happened. They challenged Suku to discuss poetry, but each time they competed they were slapped in the face and it hurt more than the last. Feng Jin could not bear to look at it, so he turned his face away. He did not dare to look at the tragic scene. Suku was not born in a good family. It was difficult for an ordinary family to study. The cheapest book in the bookstore was half a year for an ordinary family. Studying was expensive, and it was not easy for Suku to win if he did not use tricks. On the other hand, poetry was valuable because of its spirituality, which Suku did not lack. If it was an examination on strategy or holy words, he would probably be in trouble. But the reality was that a group of mediocre idiots wanted to show off, but they happened to run into Suku's strong point and were forced to be taught a lesson. Feng Jin smiled. As expected, it is not wise to attack the enemy's strong point with one's weak point. Suku glanced at him discreetly. He maintained a calm expression on his face, but in his heart, he felt a little guilty. On the other side, Jun smiled and tried to smooth things over, but his bias was very obvious. Jun, why bother with a lowly servant? It was just a coincidence. Suku's eyes darkened and he quietly clenched his fists. But he could not continue to be competitive in this situation. Otherwise, he would be humiliated and beaten to death and no one would say anything. So what if he was talented? His identity could crush people to death. Seeing that Suku was about to lose, Feng Jin smiled and suggested, governing a country and family is not something that can be solved with 1 or 2 poems. Jun, why do you care so much? It's okay to lose by 1.5 feet. It's just to kill time. Now that spring is just right, talking about poems is too boring. What do you guys think about horse racing and throwing pots? The fish are fat and fishing by the river is also fun. Feng Jin gently said to Suku, go down and ask Lanting if he is interested in playing. Jun turned his head and looked at Feng Jin with an inexplicable expression. Wait. Just when Feng Jin was about to relax, he heard his Jun, who was dressed in pink, suggest with a smile, this Jun is right. It's just that. I guess you guys have played with ordinary throwing pots and shooting arrows too many times and are tired of it. Why don't we try something new? I heard that the people of the northern borderline are tough. They often make the slaves have something on their heads and use it as a target. Hearing this, Feng Jin suddenly clenched his fists in his sleeves and warned, oh? Just to kill time. Why don't we let him try? Chapter 66. Jun did not want to offend either side, so he chose to be neutral. Feng Jin was furious. The Jun took a strange fruit from the table. It was slightly bigger than an adult's fist. Suku's eyes widened. He held the fruit in his hands, not expecting things to turn out this way. Feng Jin put down his gentle facade and said coldly, there are women here. If I miss, won't I be disturbing them? The Jun was aggressive. Etiquette, music, archery, strategy, mathematics and calligraphy are the 6 skills of a gentleman. They are the foundation of a gentleman's life. They are the key to righteousness, cultivation, family, governance, and peace. All of us here have been learning since young, how could we not be able to control such a small arrow? After that, he smiled again. He was young, but the corners of his mouth were curled up in a sinister smile. Thinking of Jiang Pingji's judgment of the man in pink, Feng Jin could not help but admire her ability to judge people. He secretly took a deep breath and maintained a calm expression on his face. Jun, have you forgotten that this is Lanting's page boy, a servant of the Lu residence? How can you deal with her people without authorization? This is not what a gentleman should do. Please reconsider. Lu Lanting had slaughtered a bunch of bandits. How could he be a good person? Rather than saying that he was protecting Suku, it was more accurate to say that he was preventing a farce from happening. Moreover, he could not understand why someone would want to cause trouble for Lu Lanting at this juncture. Did they not know that Lu Lanting's father was the general evaluation officer and could decide the future of many young scholars with one word? The Jun snorted. If anything happens to this lowly servant, I'll just compensate Lu Lanting 10 times. Bring me the bow and arrows. Lu Lanting comes from a scholarly family. His upbringing is strict. He won't ask for justice for a lowly servant. Suku's face was originally filled with anger, but now he was so angry that his hands were trembling. These people did not know about the people's livelihood and only knew how to enjoy themselves. They had no regard for human life. They were young but they were ruthless. The Jun heard the Longjuan's proud voice. The limit is 50 steps. Tell him to stand still. Remember not to tremble. Otherwise he'll miss. There were a lot of servants guarding the assembly, and a layer of white cloth was wrapped around the assembly to block the wind and the prying eyes of others. Wei Jingxian heard the commotion next door. Puzzled, she called a maid over to ask what was going on. Wan Xiu sat to the side and frowned. It's a gathering today. Why is this happening instead of talking about poetry? The noblewoman who did not know the truth chuckled. I heard that Zheng Langjun has been interested in Jingxian for a long time. If Wei Jingxian had been teased like this before, she would have glared at her angrily. But now, for some reason, she was a little absent-minded. Wan Xiu nudged her a few times before she came back to her senses. She looked absent-minded. Wan Xiu's dissatisfaction. Even if he is jealous, he should not humiliate him like this. It was one thing to lose to Zheng Langjun in poetry, but now he was humiliated and attacked him. His behavior was unsightly. After thinking for a while, she summoned her maidservant and whispered a few words to her, telling Lu Lanting to clean up the mess herself. Wei Jingxian looked at Wan Xiu with gratitude, which made Wan Xiu feel strange. Wan Xiu could not help but frown at the strange atmosphere in the gathering. Elsewhere, Jiang Pingji was still holding the reins and walking the horse. A group of spectators inexplicably started to address her as eldest senior brother and Shangguan Wan as the lowly version of her master. She had no idea what she had done to provoke these people. She felt like a group of lunatics getting high on themselves. The generation gap was indeed insurmountable. What is it now? Jiang Pingji looked up. Does this little girl still want to walk the horse? Her wooden clogs were about to be worn out by the pebbles. Shangguan Wan was uncertain. Brother Lanting, there seems to be someone running over here and waving at me. Waving? Jiang Pingji frowned. She was displeased. Let me see, she said to Shangguan Wan. She leaped onto the horse's back, which scared Shangguan Wan so much that she almost screamed. Hold on to the rope. The white horse, which had been walking quietly, suddenly raised its hooves and galloped away. What's the matter? Jiang Pengji controlled the reins and the horse stopped precisely in front of the strange maid. The maid bowed and saluted, then said, This servant's wife ordered this servant to inform Langjun to return quickly. Who knows what happened? Jiang Pingji muttered. Jiang Pingji mumbled. At that moment, Shangguan Wan, who was in Jiang Pingji's arms, looked around. She made a sound of surprise and pointed at an empty space in the assembly. Brother Lanting, look over there. Why does the target look like a person? Target? Like a person? Jiang Pingji frowned and looked in the direction Shangguan Wan was pointing. Shangguan Wan did not see the expression on Jiang Pingji's face. She waited for a long time but did not hear a response. Brother Lanting? After a long time, a slightly evil voice came from behind. Wan, do you want to play archery? Jiang Pingji curled her lips and a hint of anger flashed in her eyes. Was he trying to bully me? Without waiting for Shangguan Wan's reply, Jiang Pingji took the bow and arrow from the horse's back. Hold on to the reins. As she spoke, she tightened her legs around the horse's belly. The originally docile white horse suddenly quivered and galloped toward the assembly. Jiang Pingji calmly took out an arrow from the quiver and drew the bow to a full moon. One had to know that this bow was a strong bow that weighed 1 stone. In this era, 1 stone was equivalent to 50 kilograms. Some adult men might be able to easily draw a bow that weighed 1 stone, but for a 12-year-old boy or girl to do it, it was a bit scary. Suku suppressed the rising anger in his heart and placed the kiwi fruit on his head. 50 steps away, the Langjun in a pink robe was still smiling. He took the bow and arrow from his servant and weighed it in his hand. He was slightly satisfied. It was a bow that he usually practiced with. It required half a pickle of strength to draw it to a full moon. Feng Jin, who was standing at the side, saw that he had really drawn his bow and was obviously aiming for Suku's heart. Anger rose in his heart. He stepped forward and grabbed Suku's hand that was holding the bow. At the same time, a long arrow pierced through the air, bringing with it a wind blade that scratched his cheek. In a split second, when everyone was stunned, the Longjuan's neatly combed hair was blown away by the arrow, and his black hair scattered. Thud! Half of the arrow sank into the trunk of a pear tree. The exposed arrowhead trembled for a long time before it stopped. Who gave you the right to touch my people? Chapter 67. The audience in the streaming room was in an uproar. Anjing Zhuang, awesome streamer? Qin Shi Huang, Mama, it's her. She flirted with me through the screen, but she didn't come to marry me QAQ. It was a toxic streaming room from the content to the audience. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji wasn't affected by it. The horse's hooves clattered and a flash of white galloped over the wall of guards. It landed precisely in front of the Langjun in pink. The horse stomped on the ground with its hooves impatiently. It puffed out hot air, turned its head and pounced on the Longjuan's face. The horse stomped on the ground with its hooves in annoyance. It puffed out hot air, turned its head and pounced on the Longjuan's face. When he saw who it was, he realized it was Jiang Pingji. Her face was still full of anger. The Langjun raised his hand to touch his hair. His scalp hurt and his face darkened. He waved his sleeves angrily, gritted his teeth and asked, "Lu Shi, are you trying to kill someone?" "Kill someone?" Jiang Pingji narrowed her eyes. She held the bow in one hand and held Shangguan Wan in the other. She sneered. "That's not right. Why would I kill my own kind? I only saw that you didn't ask or tell me and you humiliated me. If that's the case, it's impolite not to reciprocate." Riding on the horse, Jiang Pingji could completely look down on the Langjun in pink who looked too gentle. She was rebellious and her aura was fierce and oppressive. For a moment no one dared to look up at her. If it wasn't for the strange atmosphere, Feng Jin would have laughed out loud. What did she mean by she wouldn't kill her own kind? In other words, wasn't she scolding others for not being human? Feng Jin heaved a sigh of relief. He released the Longjuan's hand and came out to smooth things over. He couldn't let her make things worse. However, Jiang Pingji obviously didn't want to accept his kindness. She jumped off the horse and patted its body. The horse walked leisurely and elegantly to the side. Shangguan Wan finally came back to her senses. Her face was still flushed with excitement. "Jing, I remember you're going to participate in the assessment this year, right?" Jiang Pingji pulled out an arrow from her quiver. She held the arrow with one hand and pointed the sharp arrowhead steadily at the Longjuan's delicate face. "What do you think will happen if I draw the arrow?" Jiang Pingji asked. "What do you think will happen?" Everyone's expression changed drastically. Was this a sign that they were preparing to make a move? On the other hand, compared to the tense atmosphere in the stadium, the viewers in the live stream seemed to be more relaxed and eager to learn. Pretty Girl Warrior Ayuan. What the hell is a zero? Sorcerer Girl Ah Feng. It's similar to our ancient imperial examination system. I feel like the two have similar meanings. Very Pretty Girl, why do I get so excited when I see the streamer about to bully the teenagers? Bully? Abuse? She was overthinking things. She just wanted to threaten him to disfigure his face. Feng Jin's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't dare to stop her at this time. He was afraid that she would ruin his face with a shake of her hand. Dongqing's officialdom was inherited from the previous dynasty, the Xia kingdom. There were as many rules as there were hairs on a cow. There were thousands of them, but the more famous ones were those who were born as slaves, those who were physically unfit, those who were disfigured, and those who were unfilial were not allowed to become officials. You dare to do this? Zheng Bin's face turned pale. He took 2 steps back. His cowardly behavior made him even angrier. Why don't you try and you'll know if I dare or not? Jiang Pingji's eyes were cold. Zheng Bin took a step back and she took a step forward. Compared to Zheng Bin's weak steps, Jiang Pingji was firm and decisive. If you fight me fair and square, then you're still a man. But you humiliate my page boy when I'm not here and use such despicable methods. You're really regressing. Zheng Bin could almost feel the coldness of the arrow on his cheek. He swallowed nervously. His eyeballs kept rolling down, afraid that Jiang Pingji would accidentally cut his face. The assessment was imminent. If he couldn't participate because of the injury on his face, wouldn't he feel wronged? "Lu Shi, what do you want?" Zheng Bin was annoyed. He didn't know when Lu Shi, who everyone could bully, had become so troublesome. "You like to practice archery on people's heads, don't you?" Jiang Pingji suddenly raised a smile. Everyone had a bad feeling. "Coincidentally, I like it too. You should have brought your page boy with you to the assembly today, right? We'll call it even. But to prevent people from criticizing me and thinking that I, Lu Shi, deliberately hurt people, I might as well change the rules." Feng Jin saw that she was going overboard. He couldn't help but say in a low voice, "Lanting, he's going crazy. Don't you want your future?" If today's incident spread to the assembly, she would be infamous for being cruel. "I'm not crazy. 3 arrows per person. The first arrow will be 50 steps, the second 70 steps, and the third 100 steps. The target will be the fruit. What do you think?" Jiang Pingji didn't even turn her head. Her lips were still curled up in a chilling smile. Her hand that was holding the arrow didn't even tremble in the slightest. Without waiting for Zheng Bin's reply, she shouted, "Suku, hold the fruit and stand still." Suku thought he could escape from the fate of being a human target. He didn't expect that it would be his Langjun who spoke. But he didn't hesitate for long. He put the fruit on his head and stood 50 steps away. Whoosh! Suku hadn't even seen when Jiang Pingji pulled the bow and shot the arrow. There was a muffled sound of the fruit piercing through his head. The exploding juice almost drenched his head. Before he could react to what had happened, he heard the capricious Longjuan's voice again. 70 steps. Suku was speechless. Damn it, when did she aim just now? Because of this, Suku became bolder. He took a new fruit from the handmaiden and stood still after measuring 70 steps in front of everyone. Then he shot another arrow and accurately hit the fruit on top of his head. He really underestimated his Longjuan's archery. 100 steps. Keep going. The distance of 100 steps was too small for an ordinary person's eyesight. More importantly, the light bow that was usually used for practice couldn't shoot that far. If the wind impeded the arrow, it was possible that the arrow would fall to the ground. But it wasn't a problem for Jiang Pingji. She could accurately aim even with her eyes closed. As for the bow, the one in her hand was already considered a heavy bow. As for the legendary person who could draw a three-pickle bow, she could do it too if she had enough time. Feng Jin was obviously aware of these details. He looked a little worried. What do these people think the assembly is? If they want to win, they should go somewhere else. They don't want to spoil the fun. But why do I feel that Lu Shi is getting bolder? Some noble ladies who didn't know the truth thought Lu Shi was still the shy and introverted boy he used to be. Wan Xiu was older and she looked more mature and steady. She wiped the tea stains from the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief and said with a faint smile, "She's bold because she's skilled. It's obvious that she wants to step on Zheng Bin and humiliate him. Jingxian, don't you think so?" Chapter 68. Wei Jingxian was not in the mood, but out of politeness she had to respond to Wan Xiu. She could shoot a fruit from 100 paces away with such a loose bow. "Zheng Langjun is going to be at a disadvantage," Wei Jingxian said. Wei Jingxian chimed in, "If she loses, she won't be able to get anything out of it. But if she wins beautifully, who would care about the whole story? They will only remember that Lu Lanting is good at archery and can shoot a fruit from 100 paces away." What she said was Jiang Pingji's plan. "If you dare to humiliate me, I will step on you to regain my lost face." Following his usual cool style, the last arrow was clean and tidy. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the third kiwi fruit was shot down, right in the middle. The surroundings were silent and shocked. Even Feng Jin's eyes flickered with surprise. "Your bow." Feng Jin took the bow from Jiang Pingji's hands. He knew the bow was extraordinary the moment he touched it. He tried to draw it and the weight was beyond his expectations. Then he turned his head to look at his friend. "It's at least 1 stone, right?" "Yes, it is 1 stone, but it's still a little light. I haven't used it for a long time, and it feels a little uncomfortable when I draw it to a full moon." Jiang Pingji thought Feng Jin must be thinking like this. "Feng Jin, I want to be quiet. 1 stone? Even many men could not draw it to a full moon." Not to mention Jiang Pingji was so relaxed and content just now. From the beginning to the end, not a single drop of sweat appeared on his forehead. The viewers in the live streaming room were confused. Was a bow of 1 stone that awesome? Zai Tiguanyan, I don't understand, but I have to pretend that I understand and think the streamer is awesome. Smiley face 3. Angle, Misha Warrior Ayan, can someone with good history tell me what the unit of measurement is? 1 stone? Yasubi Sangwashan, #haughty smile. Depending on the era of history, 1 is about 30 to 60 kilograms. I'm not sure about the host's world, but looking at the young man's expression, I think it's beyond the range of a normal 12-year-old. The audience was discussing how many kilograms the stone was equivalent to, but Jiang Pingji had long developed the habit of ignoring the livestream screen. She didn't forget her goal this time. She smiled at Zheng Bin naturally and said, "Now it's your turn." Now Zheng Bin was in a difficult position. If he didn't agree, the humiliation he would suffer would be far greater than when he had bullied Su Ke. He had bullied Lu Lanting's servant to vent his anger, but Lu Lanting had slapped him in the face to vent her anger. Suppressing the anger in his heart, he ignored the pleading eyes of the attendant beside him and sternly scolded him to carry the fruit 50 steps away. Compared to Su Ke's calmness, Zheng Bin's servant seemed to have stage fright. His legs were trembling, and the kiwi fruit on his head was on the verge of falling. When he saw Zheng Bin raise his bow, his legs turned to jelly and he fell to the ground. His clothes slowly became wet. Oh, he was so scared that he peed his pants? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and whistled like a hooligan. She flashed her pearly white teeth at the livid Zheng Bin. "Boring. I'm not playing anymore." Zhong Wenyuan, let's add a voice to the streamer's thoughts. "Hey, it feels so exciting to run away after acting cool." Jiang Pingji, Zheng Bin. After she finished speaking, Su Ke and Taksha stood by their sides. The big white horse proudly followed its master's footsteps. Zheng Bin took a long time to regain his composure. He angrily threw the bow in his hand to the ground and gritted his teeth. "Brute." Feng Jin looked up at the sky and the ground, but he did not look at Zheng Bin. How could he say that Lu Lanting was a girl? Wuma Jun was dumbfounded. After a while he said, "That's weird. How did Lu Zhongqing raise such an unrestrained Lang Jun? How was he a gentleman? He was clearly a playboy. There are a lot of young and frivolous people nowadays. When she's older she'll naturally change." Feng Jin's words had easily settled the matter. Although Lu Shi was unrestrained, this was also a kind of fashion, okay? In Shangyang City, the capital of Dongqing, this kind of craziness was very popular. Some Langjuns from the aristocratic families would even take off their clothes and run around in the wild. In comparison, Lu Lanting's behavior was very conservative and well-behaved. Shang Guanwan had seen everything clearly from her horse. She did not like Zheng Bin, and the scene just now was very satisfying. I didn't know that Brother Lanting had such a vengeful side. Shang Guanwan could not climb down, so she let the white horse follow Jiang Pingji's footsteps. Vengeful? That's not right, one. Your Brother Lanting is an upright person. He doesn't hold grudges. Jiang Pingji said with a smile. To others her words sounded extremely shameless. She was trying to put gold on her face. Unexpectedly she added, "Because I always take revenge on the spot. Why would I need to remember it after the event?" Jiang Pingji smiled and said. She helped Shang Guanwan down from the horse. "Help me tell Jingxian that none of the men here today are suitable for her." Wei Jingxian's family background was not low, so there was no need for her to put herself at a disadvantage when it came to marriage. As long as the conditions were met, she had the right to slowly choose. For women in ancient times, marriage was a lifelong thing, so they naturally had to be very careful. I understand. Shang Guanwan reluctantly returned to the circle of noble ladies. I'll tell Sister Jingxian in private. The matter had not been exposed yet, so it was covered with a veil. Shang Guanwan was young, but she was very clever. Jiang Pingji only had time to deal with Su Ku after the matter was settled. Her tone was not pleasant, and it was hard to tell whether she was happy or angry. I'll tell you when we get back. On the other hand, Wu Majun was curious about Jiang Pingji. He looked at Jiang Pingji with a burning gaze. Although he's frivolous, he's a promising young man. Why don't you introduce him to me? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows when she saw Feng Jin bring someone over. Brother? Feng Jin's fair face blushed. He had seen Jiang Pingji's flippant side, so he was not naive enough to think that Jiang Pingji was a good brother. Lanting, don't be silly. Have you forgotten about him? Didn't you see him in the bandit's lair? Bandit's lair? When did that happen? Wu Majun was at a loss. The corners of Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a smile. Oh, now that you mention it, I have some impression. Wu Majun's eyelids twitched. He did not know what they were talking about. Yes. Fourth Lang Jun had a high fever and was in a coma. If you did not take him in, I'm afraid? Feng Jin's attitude was relaxed, as if he was talking about family matters. I wanted to introduce you two to each other, but I didn't expect things to be so busy that it took until now. Wu Majun's face froze. Did he just get a savior? Chapter 69. However, one more savior is one more person. I can use this relationship to get to know Lu Zhongqing. I see. It was too dark at that time, so I didn't remember. Is he completely recovered from his cold now? Jiang Pingji's expression softened. There was no trace of joy. Wu Majun cupped his hands and thanked her. Since then he's almost recovered. If you don't mind, Lu Langjun can call me Zhengza. No matter how ignorant Jiang Pingji was, she knew that in ancient times, only family members, teachers and close friends could call each other by their courtesy names. She was so enthusiastic right from the start. It seemed like she had ulterior motives. Because of her temperament, she was not very patient to pretend to be courteous with others. Fortunately, there was Feng Jin by her side who could mediate between them, so the conversation was not that uncomfortable. Putting aside some personal reasons, Wu Majun's temperament was actually quite to her liking. As he spoke, Wu Majun could not help but mention what had happened just now. That Zheng Langjun is not a kind person. You embarrassed him just now. Be careful that he will hold a grudge against you in the future and cause you trouble. It's better to avoid trouble. Lanting can completely suppress this matter just now. Jiang Pingji smiled disdainfully. I have something on him. If he holds a grudge, then so be it. I'm not afraid of him. Wu Majun was speechless. Didn't they say there will be an evaluation recently? If his reputation is tarnished or something happens to him, he might not be able to enter officialdom for the rest of his life. Love Go, small Xuan Net Ku, instead of hiding his foxtail, he came out to ask for a beating. There's no need to worry about this kind of brain. Hearing her words, Wu Majun could not help but feel suspicious. Did she really have something on Zheng Bin? The gathering ended on a sour note. Zheng Bin, who had suffered a great loss, waved his sleeves and left in a rage. The other Langzhens did not show off their talents or try to please the noble ladies. They were all absent-minded. After the gathering ended, Wei Jingxian twisted her handkerchief uneasily. She bit her red lips and asked, "Did she really say that?" Sheng Wanwan giggled. Wan said that Brother Lanting isn't a reckless and unreasonable person. He treats Sister Jingxian so well, so he naturally hopes that you can find a good husband. The people at today's assembly, the birds and beasts in human clothing, they are all not good people. Wei Jingxian sighed while her beautiful brows knit together slightly, and she grumbled. If she was a man, then there wouldn't be so many problems. Previously, when he escaped from the bandits' lair and returned home, although his reputation was preserved, his parents still repeatedly questioned him, fearing that he had missed something and would be brought up again in the future. She couldn't help but ask her mother about Lu Shi's womanhood. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that his parents were insiders. Back then, the Lu residents had even come to return the token. It was only out of consideration for her reputation that they had delayed it to this day. As for today's gathering, Wei Jingxian had also expressed her opposition. After all, she and Lu Shi hadn't officially broken off their engagement. Wouldn't this put the entire Lu residence on the spot? Unfortunately, her voice was too weak, and her father had his own plans, so he didn't pay attention to her at all. Mrs. Wei's heart softened when she saw her daughter's sadness. She decided to reveal the truth to her daughter. "You don't have to worry about this anymore. Your father told the Lu residents beforehand. No matter how foolish he is, he wouldn't offend Lu Zhongqing at this time." Jiang Pingji had not yet returned home, but the news of what she had done at the gathering had already spread. Just as she had expected, everyone's attention was focused on her archery skills. As for her arrogant behavior, it became a harmless embellishment. Lu Shi was sitting upright. There was a piece of bamboo paper in front of the table. He glanced at it and realized that it was Lu Lanting's birth in 8 characters. "Did you have a good time at the gathering today?" A father's tone suggested that he was watching a good show. Jiang Pingji complained, "It was boring. A bunch of people had nothing to do, so they just sat there and mourned. Their good mood was ruined." Lu Shi almost burst out laughing. "Lanting, you're right. This kind of gathering is not a place where you can have fun. It's just that you were too reckless about Zheng Bin. Fortunately, my son's archery skills are superb. Otherwise, he would have been at a disadvantage." Jiang Pingji sat down at the table in front of Lu Shi and smiled nonchalantly. Could it be that the brat dragged his entire family here to complain to father? As the saying goes, when you hit the young, the old comes. Could Zheng Bin have gone to his parents for help because he could not beat her? If he did, I would have thrown them out. Plus, they don't have the guts to come looking for trouble. Lu Shi shook his head. In fact, that was not what he was concerned about. "I just want to tell you that it's easy to make enemies by humiliating people. If you don't have the confidence to kill them, you should learn to leave them some leeway. Leave them some leeway in life." It sounded like he was advising Jiang Pingji not to be so cruel in the future, but that was not what he meant. The premise of leaving them some leeway was that they did not have the confidence to kill them. If they did, they should be bold enough to make enemies. Lu Shi did not mind dealing with his daughter's aftermath. After all, he was good at it. But time waited for no man. He would grow old one day. Who would be able to help her then? She was still young and her temperament had not yet stabilized. Maybe she could turn things around. "Of course I have something on him," Jiang Pingji said gently. Jiang Pingji said gently, "I heard that Zheng Bin intends to enter the officialdom through the evaluation. However, the evaluation not only tests his filial piety, appearance, talent and family background, but also his reputation. If his reputation is ruined, it will be difficult for him to recover." Lu Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why do you say that?" "Zheng Bin looks like a decent person on the surface, but he has a penchant for flirting with women. He's also extremely violent. I bet he's beaten a lot of kids to death." Jiang Pingji smiled disdainfully. "It's not a big deal, but it's not a small one either. If Zheng Bin had already entered the government, his reputation would be ruined and he would be impeached a few times. But he hasn't entered the government yet, and the evaluation is very strict on his reputation." She did not finish her sentence, but it was good that she knew what she meant. Lu Shi asked a question that he was curious about. "How do you know that Zheng Bin has that kind of hobby?" Jiang Pingji answered, "I can tell if I'm not blind." Lu Shi rested his forehead on his hand. His eyes fell on the paper on the table. He suddenly asked, "If that's the case, what do you see now?" "Father, you have the smell of incense burning on your body. I've only smelled it at Shangfu Temple because there's a special herb added to it. The clothes I'm wearing are from yesterday. Even though they're very clean, the corners of the clothes have traces of being wet and dried by the night dew. Did you go to Shangfu Temple last night to find Master Liaochen to settle the marriage between me and Jing'er? Chapter 70. Lu Shi listened quietly with a calm expression. It seemed that he had been mentally prepared for this situation. That's all right. What's next? Based on my speculation, it's just a trick. For example, Master Liaochen will tell me that I can't get married in the next few years, or else I'll be killed. Or maybe I'll say that I don't want to waste Jing'er's time and ask the Weis to cancel the marriage. Jiang Pingji used the knowledge she had from the ancient times. It was the safest way. In the ancient times, men could marry at a later age, but according to Dongqing's laws, if a woman did not marry at the age of 18, her family would have to pay double the tax. It was naturally impossible for the Wei clan to not be able to pay such a tax, but their reputation would be too bad and it would be very embarrassing. Lu Lanting could afford it, but Wei Jingxian could not. Master Liaochen was a capable man, and he had a high reputation among the nobles in Hejian County. He was a monk and he never lied. The superstitious and ignorant people of the ancient times would believe his words. After all, they believed in ghosts and gods. Lu Shi listened carefully and said helplessly, "That's about it. There's not much of a discrepancy. But you have to know that I'm your father and I won't guard against you. But what if someone knows about your ability and sets a trap for you?" His daughter was smarter, more confident, and more conceited than he had imagined. Conceited people often suffered. Jiang Pingji's eyes were bright, as if there were two clusters of fire burning in them. A one-sided suppression is too boring. Only an exchange of blows can make one's blood boil with excitement. Lu Shi was speechless. He did not expect Jiang Pingji to give him such an answer, but it was a reasonable one. What if one day I'm at a disadvantage? Jiang Pingji smiled. I'm looking forward to it. I'll think about it for the rest of my life. Lu Shi smiled bitterly. I've always wondered why Master Liaochen was so sure that you would become a sovereign in the future. After all, most women in the world are weak and gentle. But now that I think about it, it's not impossible. His daughter was even more manly than a man. Her style was completely different from the rest of the family. Jiang Pingji said, "It's better to spread the news of Master Liaochen's fortune-telling as soon as possible. I'm afraid that others will maliciously harm Jing." Lu Shi raised his eyelids, and there was an indescribable look in his eyes. If it wasn't for the fact that he was sure that the one who died that year was the second son of the first wife, he would have suspected that the one in front of him was the son based on what she had just said. "You sure have tender feelings for the fairer sex." She openly admitted, being protective of the fairer sex is a virtue, and Jing-er deserves to be treated well. In a situation where there was no conflict, she had a high tolerance for women, especially beautiful and outstanding women. She had a high tolerance for them. Lu Shi was speechless. It was a pity that he wasn't a son. "If that's what you're thinking, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Lu Shi said coldly, "Madame Wei has other plans. Moreover, when a woman marries, her family background and her husband's appearance and talent are the most important criteria. As long as she doesn't marry into a lower class and humiliate her family, who cares about how she lives after marriage?" There were too many aristocratic ladies who treated their husbands with respect as ice after they got married. The fresh and tender flowers gradually withered in the back of the house. It was because of this that Lu Shi had the audacity to let the daughter of the first wife pretend to be the son of the first wife under the pleading of his late wife. Even after so many years had passed, he still couldn't forget the scene of his wife holding their drowned son as she sat paralyzed by the pond in the courtyard. Her eyes were filled with desolation, as if she had lost her soul and had no attachment to this world. However, her eyes were filled with deep hatred. How could she not hate? Jiang Pingji frowned and asked in a low voice, "Which family does Madame Wei have her eyes on?" Lu Shi asked in reply, "At today's gathering. Can you guess who it is?" Let her guess. Her guesses were all based on a certain amount of information. If she guessed based on such little information, it was very likely that she would be wrong. However, since Lu Shi had set the scope to that day's gathering, in an instant, all the Langzhens flashed through her mind one by one. "Is it Wu Ma Jun?" After a while, Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows and said with certainty, "But he is not a good candidate. Compared to Wu Ma Jun, it was better to choose Feng Jin. At least Feng Jin was a genuine genius. Not to mention other things, he was a true gentleman. Even if they could not be affectionate after marriage, he would definitely give his wife the respect and understanding she deserved. At least such a man would not pretend that he did not see it and let other women bully his wife. Wu Ma Jun was different. In other words, his heart was higher than the sky but his life was fragile. Give Wei Jingxian to him? Ah. Lu Shi paused and said, Wuma Jun is the fourth son of the emperor. Although he is not favored by the emperor, he is still a prince. Jiang Pingji looked up lazily. She said with contempt, 2 or 3 generations ago, didn't they raise horses for the previous dynasty and live in the stables? It was not that she liked ginseng and rooster or was prejudiced. She had flipped through Lu Lanting's memories. In this era where the aristocratic families were powerful, people valued bloodlines more than anything else. The Wuma royal family had the throne, but their shallow foundation had always been looked down upon by the gentry. Just by looking at the situation in the emperor's harem, she could vaguely see some of it. The crown prince, or the eldest prince, was the son of the empress. The empress was not from a prominent family, but was the second legitimate daughter of a newly ascended aristocratic family. When the emperor married her, he was still Prince Gongshan of Hejin County. In everyone's eyes, the marriage was a good match. The second prince's mother was from a merchant family. In order to please Prince Gongshan, his parents sent her to the palace to be a servant. She also worked hard. Using her pregnancy and gentleness, she slowly won over Prince Gongshuan's heart and made him indulge in her gentleness. Taking advantage of the fact that the novelty had not passed, she desperately got pregnant. She was lucky enough to have a boy in one fell swoop and gave birth to the second prince. She succeeded because of her son. When Prince Gongshan ascended to the throne, she became one of the 3 wives, Lady Hongda. The third prince was not the crown prince, but he had the highest status among all the princes. His mother came from the Feng family. The Feng family was one of the top families in Dongqing. It had been around for hundreds of years and was still standing. There were many talented people in the family. Interestingly, although the third prince's mother came from the Feng family, she was not a direct descendant. She was the daughter of a concubine. She was only a daughter of a concubine, but the current emperor had put in a lot of effort to bring her into the palace. He even gave her the position of empress. He wanted to give the position of empress to the daughter of the Feng family, but they looked down on the corrupt royal family and only respected them on the surface. It was useless for the Wuma royal family to be angry. Instead, they had to appease the Feng family to prevent them from being dissatisfied. These aristocratic families had deep roots in the Central Plains. No one knew how much power they could unleash after 1,000 years. As for the fourth prince, his background was more mysterious. There was not much news about him. It was said that he was from the Wang family of Langia. However, no one believed it. Instead, they treated it as a joke. The second prince's background was the lowest, so the emperor treated him as an abandoned son for a marriage alliance with the royal family of the northern borderline. The fourth prince's situation was rather special, but an unfavored and feared prince still wanted to marry the daughter of the Wei family's direct line of descent. Chapter 71. If it was during the founding of the country, it might be possible. But now, if Jing Er marries Wuma Jun, she will be laughed at. People will say that she gave up her pride to pursue wealth. Unless Wuma Jun's mother has an extraordinary background. It was like the daughter of a noble family marrying the son of a nouveau riche for a generous betrothal gift. It was embarrassing. Wuma Jun's mother and your mother were known as the twin beauties of Langia when they were young. They were 2 famous talented women in Dongqing. Lu Shi's words indirectly confirmed Jiang Pingji's guess. The Wuma royal family and the Wei family are beneath them, but the Wang family of Langia is of a higher status. Jiang Pingji searched her mind. Rumor had it that the fourth prince's mother was from the Wang family of Langia. Was it true? Jiang Pingji didn't have much of an impression of the Wang family, but she vaguely knew that they had a similar status as the Feng family. The twin beauties of Langia? That means Wuma Jun's mother is also quite famous. She's almost as famous as my mother. But how did she get into the harem? In order to get a woman from the Feng family into the harem, the emperor even promised a concubine's daughter the position of Zhao Yi. A woman from the Wang family of Langia had a similar reputation as Gu Min. She must have a high status in the Wang family. How could she get into the harem? I'm not sure, but Wuma Jun is indeed a child of the Wang family. Among the 4 princes, he has the highest status. Lu Shi smiled meaningfully. Even though the crown prince is the crown prince, his mother's family isn't that powerful. The emperor is also wary of him. He hasn't even taught him much about politics. Do you think a crown prince like that is the heir to the throne? Well, there's no point in going around in circles. Dongqing is going to fall. What's the point of arguing about that? Lu Shi's words made Jiang Pingji's mind clear. Wuma Jun is the heir to the throne? If that was the case, it was not impossible for Wu Majun to marry Wei Jingxian. Lu Shi shook his head. That's not the case. The emperor is really afraid of him. He has been trying to weaken the Wang family in recent years, but he's failed several times. Jiang Pingji was speechless. As a martial artist, she really couldn't understand the mind of a scholar. Noticing the faint smugness on Lu Shi's face, the corners of her mouth twitched uncontrollably. Please enlighten me, father. Think about it yourself. Lu Shi was in a good mood as he left behind the 4 words. Even his facial features seemed to be filled with joy. A comment from the audience in the streaming room suddenly appeared in Jiang Pingji's mind. It feels so exciting to run away after putting on an act. She stood rooted to the ground for a long time, trying hard to suppress her curiosity, and muttered, I'm not curious. The Wuma royal family was like a grasshopper at the end of autumn. Who knew how long they could last? Instead of wasting time thinking about their internal family conflicts, it was better to think about how to get Wei Jingxian out of it. Some of the viewers in the live stream room expressed that they did not understand her thoughts and even felt some reflexively disgust. She was too presumptuous. She felt that Wu Majun was not a good husband, so he was not a good husband? Marriage was a matter between 2 people. Maybe Wei Jingxian and Wu Majun were a good match? As an outsider, what was she worrying about? They were not her parents. What right did they have to say anything? Host V, didn't Monk Liaochen say that I will take the path of conquering the world in the future? The current situation is unstable. Who knows when it will be a complete mess? If that's the case, will the Dongqing royal family still exist? Do you think I will be merciful? The remnants of the previous dynasty had to be eliminated because the roots had to be removed. If Wei Jingxian really married Wu Majun, wouldn't she become a young widow? I can't bear to see that happen. The audience, after a long time, some netizens finally could not help but say something. You can hit me if you don't agree. Host, maybe you are thinking too much. Jiang Pingji smiled without saying anything. She did not know if she was thinking too much, but she knew that according to the current situation, the world would be in chaos sooner or later. Others might not know, but Jiang Pingji knew herself very well. Jiang Pingji was never a person who was content with her lot. During peaceful times, she could force herself to be obedient, but if the environment was chaotic, she did not mind stepping in and finding something for herself to do. Jiang Pingji seemed to have thought of something. She picked up the brush and wrote 2 words on the bamboo paper on the table. Even those who did not know calligraphy could see the viciousness and oppression in the 2 words. It was not that she had made much progress, but she had subconsciously integrated her emotions into the words. Jiang Pingji put down the brush and said with satisfaction, Su Ku, frame this and hang it in the study. Su Ku did not know Jiang Pingji well, and he could not figure out his Longjuan's temper. Therefore he did not dare to offend her, lest he was punished. However, when he stepped forward to clean up the calligraphy, he could not help but be stunned. A murderous aura hit him in the face. Even though the words were not beautiful, the neat and tidy handwriting revealed its extraordinariness. He could not help but murmur. His face was a little confused. Causing trouble? The words in this era were similar to the ancient words in the world of the streaming room. However, after thousands of years of evolution, the words in the world of the streaming room had become simple. If the words were written properly, they might be able to guess a few words correctly. However, Jiang Pingji's handwriting was like dancing dragons and dancing phoenixes. The audience in the streaming room became illiterate. If Suku had not read it out, they would not have known what she had written. You can hit me if you don't agree. Damn, the streamer is crazy. Causing trouble. Cough cough cough. Whose trouble are you trying to cause? Are you stupid this year? Needless to say, it's definitely not that Jing Bin. It's that Wu Majun. One of them put his face forward for the streamer to hit, and after being hit once, he wants to be hit again. The other one wants to steal the streamer's wife. Men can't tolerate this. Tudu Feichio, every time the streamer acts like a tyrant, I can't help but think of a phrase. Xian, D, Tyrant Emperor card. This Chao to you? Haha, have you forgotten that the streamer is a girl? Even if she wants to shake, it should be a delicate body shake. San Shasha, a girl with a big penis and the aura of a tyrant emperor. Poor Taoists see your chrysanthemum poison. It's so boring. I really want to be pressed down on the ground by the streamer. Ah, harder. Even though she had been with them for a few days, Jiang Pingji still could not understand the magical thinking and style of the audience in the streaming room. They were all poisonous. Jiang Pingji secretly poked the system and asked hesitantly, over there. Is it because the evolution of the human brain hasn't been completed? What was so strange about the word causing trouble? It had been the slogan of the 7th Legion for thousands of years, ever since it was established. The system looked like it had nothing to live for. Others are ginseng roosters. It's just that you don't understand their cuteness. Chapter 72. Hang up the words and kneel in the corridor for an hour. Think about what you did wrong. Just when Suku thought that the matter was over, Jiang Pingji suddenly added something that made him freeze. Suku held the paper with both hands. He was still angry, but his posture was very humble. Yes. Takshu, who was at the side, did not seem surprised when she saw that. Suku's performance at the assembly was outstanding. He had beaten up the gentry nobles, but what was the point? Take this as a lesson. Next time, don't be arrogant and cause trouble for Langjun. Takshu walked to Suku's side after leaving the study. She raised her eyebrows and looked serious. Any of the nobles at the assembly could have easily killed you. Suku pursed his lips and lowered his voice. They were after Langjun, but they were not as good as you. Takshu frowned and refuted him coldly. What you did before was to protect Langjun from being humiliated or to show off. You and I both know it. Do you still need to quibble? There are many ways to protect Langjun, but you chose the wrong one. If you had not stepped on them, Zheng Langjun would not have been so shameless as to hold a grudge against a servant. Takshu stared at Suku and he suddenly felt guilty. Takshu was right. He had the best of both worlds. He would not let Lu Lanting be humiliated, and he would not let the Langjuns lose face. But why did he have to do it? In the end, Suku still could not accept his current identity. He turned his face to avoid Takshu's gaze. Takshu only smiled and said coldly, "Since you think you are virtuous and well-read, do you know what it means to die if your master is humiliated?" In that era, gentry nobles had the right to have private soldiers. That was one of the main reasons why they could threaten the imperial power. The aristocratic families of this era had the right to raise private armies and retainers. This was also one of the main reasons why they had such a high status and could even threaten the imperial power. Lu Shi's reputation in Dongqing was like the sun in the sky. Even the current emperor loved and feared him. Not to mention that Lu Shi's reputation in Dongqing was like the sun at high noon. Even the current emperor loved and feared him. Suku had slapped the nobles' faces. Although he had made Jiang Pingji proud, he had also attracted more hatred and grudges. From the perspective of an official, what Suku had done before was really a bad idea. In the end, Jiang Pingji had to step in and save him from the danger of having his head split open. If it had been a slightly useless Langjun, he would definitely have killed himself today. Thinking of this, his face suddenly turned pale, and the wound on his cheek, which was covered with medicine, began to ache. Takshu and Suku each had their own thoughts, but their thoughts were ultimately restricted by this era. In fact, when Jiang Pingji punished Suku to kneel, she didn't think that deeply. She just felt that Suku, the naughty child, was seeking death happily. If he didn't teach him a lesson, wouldn't his tail be too cocky? Not every Langjun had the ability to save the damsel in distress like her. If this kind of behavior was placed in the 7th Corps, how could it be erased with just an hour of kneeling? Without a complete set of hellish training and a few days of sparring with the commander, it would be impossible for him to learn his lesson. It was fine for a young man to be high-spirited, but he couldn't really go crazy. He still needed to restrain himself. After turning off the live stream, Jiang Pingji looked at her plan and was lost in thought. The training of the servants in the village can be accelerated. I need to find something for Suku to do as soon as possible. I need to temper his temper. Even if he knew that there was a piece of jade in a stone, if he didn't polish it carefully, the jade would be destroyed. Jiang Pingji still hoped that Suku would be an accountant in the future. As she was thinking, she took the time to look at the points of popularity in the live stream account. For the past few days, the room was always full, and there was always an unknown number of people queuing outside. Including the scattered gifts, the points of popularity accumulated were actually quite considerable. According to the contract, the points obtained in the end had to be divided equally with the system. Therefore, Jiang Pingji's account only had 10,034 points of popularity. Later, she carefully studied the contract given by the system. A level 1 streamer, which was the beginner streamer, had a maximum audience of 3,000. If she wanted to increase the limit, she had to level up. A level 2 streamer had a maximum audience of 10,000, but she had to pay 100,000 points of popularity. 100,000 points seemed like a lot, but according to the current speed of the live stream, it was very easy to level up. The difficulty was in the subsequent levels. The difficulty would jump by a large margin, and the number of popularity points needed each time was massive. It was simply a bottomless pit that could not be filled. not to mention that there were other tempting treasures in the shopping center. Encountering such a system, there were only 3 words left in her mind: buy, buy, buy. If it were an ordinary person, they would probably be unable to resist the temptation and squander as many points as they had. They might even start to think of other ways to get more points. If they couldn't increase the audience limit for the time being, they would think of ways to make the existing audience pay out of their own pockets. Jiang Pingji disdained such behavior, because she knew very well that there was never a free lunch in the world. There must be an unknown trap behind a free lunch. She could not cross the bottom line. Once crossed, it would be like taking drugs, and there would be a second and third time. She opened the character attributes panel and stared blankly at the information on it. Name: Jiang Pingji Lu Shi. Courtesy name: Lanting, also known as Lu Lanting. Base strength: 5, strength fusion plus 30, gender: female disguised as a man replacing the deceased brother Lu Lanting, age 41, 12, born in the 3rd year of Tianwu's Flower Festival, birth: the 2nd legitimate son, eldest legitimate daughter, of the Lu family in Hejin County. Fiancé: Wei Jingxian, the 2nd legitimate daughter of the Wei family in Hejin County. Specialties: 6 arts of rights, beginner, fighting expert, analysis expert, other abilities temporary, attributes, charm hidden 25, appearance 75, channel, streaming activated, streamer level 1, their reasoning skill had been temporarily changed to expert, and the hidden charm value had increased from 21 to 25. However, these were all useless to her. Her gaze was fixed on one thing: strength fusion plus 30. If you rely on someone, the mountain will collapse. If you rely on others, the only person you can rely on is yourself. Jiang Pingji narrowed her eyes and said, "System, when you were bound to me, I heard the sound of the fusion progress. Because the host did not have enough points, the fusion progress was temporarily halted. The final fusion was only 3%. The system quickly replied, "Yes, because the host did not have enough points, the fusion could not progress further." The so-called strength fusion was actually the soul's ability to digitize the strength it had when it was alive and integrate it into the current body. This was one of the host's advantages, winning at the starting line. Jiang Pingji's physical fitness in her previous life was not something that could be reflected by the cold numbers. Jiang Pingji asked, "Can I use my own points to continue the fusion?" Chapter 73. The system paused as if it was thinking about the meaning of her words. Then it tried to dissuade her with a pained expression. "Host, based on your current strength, it's not worth it to waste your points on the fusion." Jiang Pingji's strength in her previous life could definitely make her a monster that couldn't be killed, but what was the use of that? In this ancient world, Jiang Pingji could exchange points for more useful skills or items that could make her life better, but she was stubborn and wouldn't listen. Moreover, it was a harem system. The host was going to be the queen. Even if Jiang Pingji didn't agree with it, the system wouldn't give up on the target just because the host didn't want to cooperate. If she could perfectly fuse the strength from her previous life, then, who had ever seen an empress who could poke a hole in the emperor's head with one finger? The scene was too beautiful. It didn't dare to look at it. If you broadcast for a few more days, the system will be able to undergo its first upgrade. At that time, there will be more items unlocked in the shop. You can use your points then. It will help you adapt to this era and live a more comfortable life. Since it was called the multidimensional harem streaming system, it had more functions than what Jiang Pingji had seen. What if she used her points on something as useless as the fusion of strength? What if she needed to buy something in case of emergency? Jiang Pingji understood the system's concerns, but she scoffed at it. "No matter what happens, I'm confident that I can handle it perfectly." In her previous life, without the system, she could still rise from a low-level federal soldier to a high-ranking commander. In this life, she had come to an ancient era. Would she be unable to take care of herself without the system's help? The strength belonged to her. Using points to exchange for the fusion was just a fair trade with the system. Due to the limitations of her body's genes, no matter how much she trained, she couldn't recover even 1% of her previous life strength. Her body was like a glass of water. No matter how much she poured into it, it could only hold 1 cup of water. The fusion the system mentioned was more like optimizing the body's genes. It could change the container from a cup to a water tank. That way the container could hold more water. Just tell me if these points of popularity can help me recover some of my strength. I don't want to hear anything else. The system was forced into a corner and could only reluctantly say, "You can, but there are too few points and the fusion effect is very low." Zhong Sunyuan did not dislike this. She also had a faint premonition that if she wanted to fuse all of the martial power of her past life and develop the genes of this body to the same degree as before, the number of points needed might be unimaginable. However, no matter how difficult it was, she still had to give it a try. Sometimes, the system was really too much of an eyesore. It seemed docile, but it always wanted to control her and make her act according to its wishes. Between the host and the system, it seemed that the former was in the dominant position. However, Jiang Pingji tested the system several times and found that it was not the case. At present, the status between them was still relatively fair. It was a cooperative relationship, but what about in the future? The system was so desperate for popularity points that it urged her to start a live stream. What was its motive? He might as well make a bold guess. Popularity points could make the system more powerful. As the host, if he stayed where he was, what would happen then? Her choice conflicted with the system's goal. She couldn't see it now, but once the difference between the two was huge, it would be easy to deal with. Jiang Pingji had never been a puppet who was led by the nose, but she had to maintain the state of being weak even if she didn't want to. Instead of being so passive, it was better to settle for the next best thing and find a way to slowly find the strength of her past life. Jiang Pingji looked down and said, "It's okay. Many a little makes a mickle. Everything has to be done slowly." Seeing that the host was so determined, the system could not force her not to do it. It could only bear with the pain in its stomach and reluctantly agree to her choice. Jiang Pingji heard a system notification sound that was not pleasant to the ear. A virtual screen appeared in front of her. "Host, are you sure you want to use 10,000 points to continue the fusion?" "Confirm B, consider." Jiang Pingji did not hesitate and clicked confirm. The points in her account were instantly emptied, leaving only 34 points. She waited for a while, but there was no reaction from her body. Just as she was about to ask what was going on, a sudden sharp pain came from the bottom of her feet. It went straight to her brain, as if two huge iron nails had been forcefully hammered into her body. Her knees weakened and she almost knelt on the ground. However, that was only the beginning. In less than half a breath, Jiang Pingji's face was pale from the pain. Her forehead was quickly covered in cold sweat. Her lips were a little green, the veins on her forehead were bulging, and her eyeballs looked like they were about to pop out. They were bloodshot and looked extremely terrifying. All the muscles in her body were stimulated and began to spasm crazily. Jiang Pingji felt that she had some difficulty breathing, and she could not help but change her expression. She lowered her head to look at her hands, and the corners of her lips curled into a mocking smile. Her originally thin hands were now in the shape of claws due to the spasms, and the joints of her fingers were distinct. It looked extremely terrifying, and because of the intense pain she was even slightly out of control. She accidentally knocked over the paperweight on the table and made a sound when it fell to the ground. Outside the study, the maid Xuanmei heard the noise and asked softly, "Langjun, what are your orders?" Jiang Pingji tried her best to take a deep breath to relieve the feeling of suffocation. She secretly bit the tip of her tongue and let the blood and pain temporarily suppress the spasm of her mouth muscles to avoid suffocation. Her voice was still calm. "Nothing, I accidentally knocked the paperweight to the ground." "Xuanmei, prepare the hot soup." As expected, Xuanmei did not hear anything strange. She respectfully responded and went to order the servant to boil the water for Jiang Pingji. At that moment, Jiang Pingji was in so much pain that she curled her body into a ball. Her breathing became more and more difficult, and her face even turned a little purple. After an unknown amount of time, the sharp pain gradually subsided. Jiang Pingji resisted the pain and did not make a sound. At that moment, she had exhausted all her strength. She lay on the ground with her eyes closed. Her breathing was very weak. After another quarter of an hour, her strength slowly recovered. At that moment, Xuanmei had already returned. She reported through the door, "Langjun, the hot soup is ready." Jiang Pingji heard the noise and secretly rolled her eyes. She gritted her teeth and climbed up. She raised her hand and pulled her sleeve to randomly wipe the sweat on her face. "Help me bathe." Xuanmei carefully gathered her black hair and wrapped it in a handkerchief to prevent it from getting wet. Jiang Pingji pursed her lips. Her pale lips gradually became more rosy under the hot steam. She closed her eyes and leaned against the bathtub. It looked like she was taking a nap, but in fact she was communicating with the system. Her muscles were sore and swollen. She was too lazy to even lift a finger. Chapter 74. The internet provides you with exciting novels to read. The system said helplessly, "I'm sure the host has already guessed the nature of the fusion force." Jiang Pingji nodded in her heart. Although she was exhausted, she was still very alert. Genetic enhancement, she said confidently. If Lu Lanting's previous genes meant that she could only have 5 points of combat power, that limit would be raised after the fusion. The system was going crazy. If the host knows this, then you should also know how dangerous it is. You almost died. To be honest, as a qualified system, it had nurtured countless hosts over a long period of time. In the past, there were hosts like Jiang Pingji who put on a brave front. However, after experiencing the pain of integration, most of them would retreat and choose a gentler and more effective method. As long as you have popularity points, what can't you buy? Jiang Pingji replied with a smile, but she was not afraid. It was painful, but she would not die. If she did not have such knowledge and judgment, she would have died a long time ago in her previous life. Die. Not yet. I think I'm in a good state. The system vaguely had an ominous premonition. Jiang Pingji had said so. Could it be that she had not given up on the idea of continuing the fusion? The system's premonition was right. When Jiang Pingji was stubborn, even 10 bulls would not be able to pull her back. 10,000 points to push the fusion rate to 1%. Jiang Pingji opened the stats panel and saw that the fusion force had gone from +30 to +31. She was slightly disappointed. If she had known this would happen, she would have waited until she had more points before the fusion. Now she had suffered for nothing. She would definitely remember this next time. The system poured a bucket of cold water on him and said, "This is only the initial stage of fusion, so the points required are not many. When the number exceeds the limit of a normal human, the points required will be more than this. Moreover, the risks required for each fusion will increase exponentially." According to the system's calculations, Jiang Pingji's combat power in her previous life was not as simple as breaking through the limit of a normal human. After living for so many years, it was the system's first time meeting such a troublesome and suicidal host. Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a faint smile. I know this better than you. There was no one who understood the pain and reaction of every gene optimization better than she did. In her previous life, she had been a genetic warrior selected by the Federation. Over the past several decades, she had passed through countless life and death situations. Her life hanging by a thread was a common occurrence for her. She had long since gotten used to it. Moreover, in her opinion, the risk was worth it compared to the bountiful harvest. Jiang Pingji looked at her palm coldly. Her heart was terrifyingly calm, without a trace of emotion. The system continued. According to the host's current streamer level, it is impossible for you to accumulate so many popularity points. The live broadcast room of a first-class anchor only had a maximum audience of 3,000. Assuming that the daily audience reached a maximum of 3,000, the fixed daily income of popularity points would only be 1,500. Even if there were some tips, the chances of encountering a tycoon would be very low. However, for the second and later stages of the fusion, the number of popularity points required would increase exponentially. Sharpening the knife will not delay the work of cutting firewood. If your streamer's level can increase by 1 or 2 levels, the points of popularity that you gain every day will be several times or even more than 10 times what you have now. The system could not understand Jiang Pingji's thoughts at all. Why was the host so stubborn? It was only a month's worth of popularity points to increase the level of the live broadcast room. It was a very worthwhile transaction. It thought that she would refute it this time, but Jiang Pingji agreed with it and agreed with it. She said in her heart, "You are right. If the streamer's level does not increase, the speed of accumulating popularity points will be too slow." The system was secretly delighted. It thought that Jiang Pingji had finally been persuaded. However, what she said next gave it a head-on blow, instantly extinguishing all its enthusiasm. Jiang Pingji asked it, "System, do you think a semi-interactive live broadcast or a fully interactive live broadcast is better? If it's the former, the initiative is still in my hands. If it's the latter, although it can stimulate the audience's enthusiasm, it can easily go wrong." Regardless of whether it was a semi-interactive live broadcast or a fully interactive live broadcast, both had a common feature. After the completion of the live broadcast task, the audience would conduct a survey and vote based on their satisfaction with the content of the live broadcast. According to the audience's satisfaction, they would receive 3 levels of treasure chests: gold, silver, and bronze. When the treasure chests were opened, the streamer would receive random rewards. Among them, there was a card that could directly increase the streamer's level for free. If the system could visualize it, its face would probably be as black as ink. "You plan to increase the streamer's level based on looks?" Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. Her dark eyes carried some joy. "You have to believe that girls who love to smile usually have good luck. The system was about to grind its molars. It could not help but complain, "You are really confident in your luck. Girls with bad luck would not be able to smile at all." Cards that could directly increase the streamer's level for free could indeed be obtained by opening treasure chests, but the probability was only a pitiful 1%. It was still the same question. What kind of sin had it committed? How did it encounter such a stubborn host? "My luck has always been good." Jiang Pingji crossed her arms in front of her chest. Her black hair was a little damp and scattered behind her head, which made her handsome face look a little more gentle. "If I'm unlucky, who else in this world can live another life after death like me?" The system was silent for a long time. Once again, it deeply realized that its host was different from the others in the past. "Ha, host, you are capricious." The system could not help but clench its teeth. "If you don't try, you will never know how bad your luck is." Jiang Pingji did not take the system's words to heart. Instead, she provoked it. "Believe me, I am the Emperor of Luck." Jiang Pingji did not know what unlucky, or Emperor of Luck, meant at first. She had to thank the audience for knowing these words. Every time the stream got a little boring, the audience would use the bullet screen as a chatting platform and chat happily. In the past 2 days, they frequently mentioned words such as unlucky, Emperor of Luck, SSR, and addicted to drawing cards. Jiang Pingji would also read their bullet screen when she was bored. Over time, without a teacher, she slowly understood the meaning of these unfamiliar words. The system was angry. However, when it thought of Jiang Pingji's confident attitude and her previous actions, it felt a little creepy. Could it be that her luck was really that good? If she did not have something to rely on, she would not be so sure that she would be able to increase the streamer's level by looking at her face. The higher the level of the treasure chest, the better the item, and the higher the possibility of getting a free upgrade card. If she really had the ability to get the highest ratings every time and get the gold treasure chest, maybe she could really level up? Thinking of the bright future after leveling up, the system's gloomy mood eased a little and became a little brighter. Life was not just about the present but also poetry in the future. It should be more optimistic. Chapter 75. After a comfortable bath, her sore limbs finally regained their strength. They were not as weak as before. Jiang Pingji changed into a simple set of home clothes and knelt in front of the bronze mirror. She let Xuanmei and Taxia play with her hair. Noticing Taxia's hesitation on her left, she could not help but open her eyes. She glanced at her and asked softly, "What's wrong, Xuanmei?" At that moment, Xuanmei's gaze fell on her loosened clothes. She could vaguely see the layers of corsets inside. Xuanmei's cheeks were a little flushed after being caught red-handed. She hesitated and bit her lower lip. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "Second Langjun, Su Ku is still kneeling in the veranda outside the courtyard. I wonder." As soon as Xuanmei said that, Taxia glared at her. She had no choice but to shut her mouth. She looked worried and timid. "Hasn't an hour passed? Why is he still kneeling?" Jiang Pingji frowned. She asked Su Ku to kneel and reflect for an hour, which was only an hour. But according to what Xuanmei said just now, did it mean that Su Ku had been kneeling outside for more than 4 hours? At least 4 hours? Taxia snorted. Her hands nimbly tied her long hair into a simple bun. It was a little loose and looked a little casual and lazy. Only Xuanmei is soft-hearted. Based on Su Ku's previous actions, it's not too much to make him kneel for a day and a night. What's more, Langjun only asked him to kneel and reflect for an hour. If he doesn't want to get up, who can hold his shoulders and stop him from getting up? Like a lit firecracker, Taxia's words carried a strong sense of dissatisfaction and anger. Jiang Pingji stood up, gathered her clothes and tightened the outer robe. Her tone was a little comforting. "I think Taxia should change her name. How can this hot temperament be as cold as ice?" His heart was clearly burning with passion. "I know you feel unfair for me, but Su Ku is different. You can't treat him like an ordinary servant." Taxia's pretty face was tainted by Jiang Pingji's teasing. She said angrily, "Langjun seems to be enlightened now. You can really say anything. Fortunately, I know Langjun's character. If it were a girl, her soul would have been seduced." That sentence could be translated into 4 words. If I didn't marry, why would I seduce her? All right. I will restrain myself from now on. I will definitely not carelessly seduce a girl's soul. After Jiang Pingji finished talking, she turned to Xuanmei and ordered, "Go and tell Su Ku to go and rest early. Tomorrow morning he will follow me to the village for an inspection. The weather is unpredictable and the humidity is high at night. He has been kneeling for so long. How can his knees withstand the cold?" Xuanmei was perturbed and uneasy at first, but after hearing Jiang Pingji's instructions, her pale face regained some color. She knew that second Langjun was still the same. He was always so gentle and generous. Taxia scoffed as she watched Sun Mei leave. She was a little disdainful as she muttered softly, "Wishful thinking." Based on the hearing of others, they definitely could not hear what she said, but that did not include Jiang Pingji. She turned her head and asked suspiciously, "How did Xuanmei offend you? I see that you two have a good relationship." Taxia's breathing stagnated. She immediately felt a little awkward, as if she did not know how to answer her question. In the end, she simply gave up and twisted her handkerchief. She bit her lip and said, "Langjun is kind and pure, and you've been raised as a man since you were young. How would you know the thoughts of ordinary girls? That Xuanmei obviously has other intentions. She's thinking of seeking a higher position." "Looking for a higher place?" Jiang Pingji smiled and raised her eyebrows. She lowered her voice and asked curiously, "Are you saying that Xuanmei has feelings for Su Ku?" Su Ku was only 17 years old, but in ancient times he would have been a grown man who could start a family and start a career. He was not bad looking. Even though his face had been tattooed, it did not diminish his beauty. In Jiang Pingji's eyes he looked even more mature. Taxia's eyes were a little dazed when she heard her straightforward guess. She seemed to be in disbelief as she patrolled her face back and forth. She was determined to find out something. However, Jiang Pingji's heart was not that easy to pry into. After a while, Taxia gave up. "What do you mean by having feelings for Su Ku? You're obviously disloyal. You think that Su Ku is a rare commodity. Even though Xuanmei and I are only Langjuan's maidservants, there are different ranks of maidservants. Langjuan's situation is special. When Langjun turns 20, his status will be even more different." At first, Taxia gritted her teeth angrily. She blushed and skipped over some of the content. Other than the masters of the Lu residence, only Taxia and Xuanmei knew Lu Lanting's true gender. The two maidservants had been handpicked by Lu Shi and his second wife. They had been raised since young and were even more particular about their daily necessities than the daughters of wealthy merchants. They were both smart. How could they not know now if they did not know when they were young? Unless there were some unforeseen circumstances, Lu Lanting's gender would have to be kept a secret. As the two maidservants who knew the truth, their future was clear. When Lu Lanting came of age, they would become her concubines. If Lu Lanting was a man, it would be a great opportunity for the maidservants. They would become the cream of the crop. Because of their friendship when they were young, even if he couldn't pamper the harem alone, he would still be able to gain some favor. Not to mention, Lu Lanting was a soft-hearted and kind person. Even if they had to work for the legal wife in the future, they would not be treated coldly. Unfortunately, no one knew better than them that Lu Lanting was not a man. She was a woman of the same gender as them. It was normal for Xuanmei to have other thoughts. She wanted to find a way out for herself. Jiang Pingji's mind was sharp. Even if she did not know much about the ancient times, she could make some logical deductions. When she connected the dots between Taxia and Xuanmei, her doubts were instantly answered. She smiled and patted Taxia's hair affectionately. Under Taxia's confused and angry gaze, Jiang Pingji teased, "Xuanmei's actions are exactly what you want. Now that she's gone, you will be the only one who can enjoy my love." Taxia was speechless. First, her pretty face blushed, then it turned green with embarrassment. When she realized that Jiang Pingji was only teasing her, she instantly realized that she had been fooled. She was so angry that her eyes were bloodshot. "Langjun, you're so good at teasing people. Am I a petty person in your heart?" Chapter 76. Jiang Pingji almost couldn't hold back her laughter, but she still begged for mercy with a kind voice. It took a lot of effort to quell the little girl's anger. "Ahem, let's stop fooling around. Let's be serious." Jiang Pingji coughed softly. Under the gaze of the other party's watery eyes, she said gently, "You and Xuanmei grew up together. There's really no need to be hostile towards each other over such a small matter. I know you're feeling indignant for me, but Taxia, both you and she are women and so am I. I can understand why she did that." Taxia was smart. She instantly understood what Jiang Pingji meant. Her heart skipped a beat. "Langjun, don't say anything first. Let me finish." Jiang Pingji raised her hand to stop her from speaking. Her tone was still as gentle as before. "I can guess a little bit about father and mother's plans. They arranged it this way because they were afraid that you wouldn't be able to keep your mouth shut and leak my secret. They also hoped that I would have someone useful by my side in the future. However, times have changed and the situation is constantly changing. who can predict what will happen in the future. From Jiang Pingji's point of view, it was a sin to let two beautiful flowers wither quietly in order to hide her personal secret. She lived openly, so why did she need to hide? She was proud of her gender and never felt like a burden. He smiled and said, "You and Xuanmei, I've treated you as my family since you were young. If you have someone you like or have other thoughts, just tell me and I'll arrange it for you." It's not easy for a woman to be born. From a young age, they've experienced the feeling of not being able to control themselves. Now that you've come to be my maidservants, I'll protect you and give you the right to do whatever you want. I'll talk to my father. Before Jiang Pingji could finish speaking, Taksha's eyes, which were already red, were now heavy with tears. Finally, she hugged Jiang Pingji as if she had lost her composure. She complained in her neck, "Langjun, you promised not to seduce a girl's soul." Jiang Pingji spread her hands in her heart. She was innocent, so she would not take the blame. It was clearly a pure friendship, so why did people always think of it the wrong way? The system, who had witnessed the entire process, snorted coldly and became more and more depressed about the days ahead. "Wipe away your tears. If I were a man, I'd be heartbroken." Jiang Pingji smiled and helped her wipe it with her sleeve. Taksha retorted in a low voice, "Langjun, do you mean that your heart doesn't ache anymore?" Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows meaningfully. "That's not it. It's all heartache but in different directions." Taksha was stunned at first. She did not understand what she meant, but she quickly regained her senses. Her exposed skin felt like it was on fire. Jiang Pingji pretended that she didn't see anything. Her expression returned to normal and she said to her, "As for Xuanmei, tell her about it secretly so that she doesn't fall for it." Although Su Ku was a good person, he was not suitable for her. Her little tricks won't be able to subdue that person. Seeing that her Langjun was sitting and talking in a serious manner, Taksha quickly put away the unnecessary thoughts in her heart. She dared not continue to throw a tantrum. She didn't think much of Jiang Pingji's flattery of Su Ku. "Langjun, you're flattering him too much." No matter what, Su Ku was just a servant bought by the Lu residents. He was a lowly servant, not to mention the humiliating mark on his face. What about Xuanmei? Although Taksha didn't like Xuanmei's petty thoughts, she wouldn't deliberately belittle her. She was her Langjuan's trusted servant. Her status was second only to the masters of the mansion and the head housekeeper. If she had any thoughts about Su Ku, it would be because Su Ku was of a higher status. However, from what her Langjun said, it seemed that Xuanmei was not worthy of Su Ku. Jiang Pingji smiled helplessly, but she didn't plan to explain anything. Su Ku looks simple and honest, but he is extremely arrogant and self-centered. Xuanmei will easily be at a disadvantage if she follows him. If she hadn't forcefully bought Su Ku, he might have already escaped from the broker house. If the world was peaceful, Su Ku would indeed have a hard time achieving anything in his life. After all, his lowly background was enough to send him to the 18th level of hell. However, the times made heroes. In a few years the world would be in chaos. Who could guarantee that he wouldn't take advantage of the situation and soar to the sky? Moreover, if she really wanted to cause trouble in the future and Su Ku satisfied her, then it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. After listening to what Jiang Pingji said, Taksha didn't realize that Jiang Pingji was hiding something. She thought that was the only reason. She whispered discontentedly, "Langjun is so considerate of her, but she's so opinionated. She's siding with an outsider." Jiang Pingji said, "It's just human nature." As long as he didn't have any intention of betraying her or stepping on her bottom line, she wouldn't care about such a small problem. If he stepped on her bottom line or betrayed her, she wouldn't be so easy to deal with. On the other side, after Xuanmei got permission, she walked to the porch with complicated thoughts. She looked at Su Ku, who was motionless like a clay statue. It was late at night and the air was chilly and damp. Compared to the warmth of the day, it was so cold that her fingertips were red. She was holding a cloak that she had made herself. The style was simple, and the cloth used was also bought by her. As Xuanmei spoke, she put the cloak on Su Ku. "Second Langjun has given you permission to get up. If you continue to kneel here, people will see you. Who knows what they will think of Second Langjun? They might say that she's cruel and doesn't care about her servants." Su Ku was already a little dazed by the night wind. Suddenly he felt a burst of warmth and fragrance. He couldn't help but look up. He happened to meet Xuanmei's bright and gentle eyes. They were like a clear spring, and he could see into the other's heart with just one look. However, he quickly looked away and didn't dare to look directly at her. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that Xuanmei and Takshu had special identities. In the aristocratic families, They were basically the reserve servants of the young masters. Suku was so cold that his lips were a little numb. It's nothing. I made a mistake. I'm reflecting on myself. Xuanmei told Suku what Jiang Pingji had said, word for word. After he heard it, his eyes flickered a few times and then he calmed down. Then he sighed and chuckled. He said inexplicably, Langjun, you're good. He had Takshu, who was sensible, and Xuanmei, who was gentle and warm. One was hard and the other was soft. The former was ordered to remind him, and the latter represented her kindness and softness. Jiang Pingji's performance that day, as well as her magnanimous way of doing things, was admirable. Suku raised his hand to gather the cloak, and he staggered to stand up. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and thanked Xuanmei in a low voice. Lu Shi was the first to hear about what happened outside Jiang Pingji's yard. He was stunned for a long time. It looks like I won't have to use the wolf taming program anymore. Under the candlelight, Lu Shi pursed his lips, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He suppressed the smile that was about to spill out. There were always two kinds of people who liked to make simple things complicated. One was the smart people and the other was the smart people. Chapter 77. Take a look at this. If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me. Jiang Pingji threw the booklet she had compiled over the past few days to Suku. It was filled with training plans she had made based on the situation in ancient times. In order to come up with these things, she had really racked her brain. It was not that the training plan was difficult, but it was very difficult to make it simple. For example, the training she had undergone since she was a child. All kinds of equipment were currently the most popular mainstream equipment, and the training schedule was also constantly changing according to the growth of her physical fitness. There were strict standards for her 3 meals a day, all in order to maximize the potential of her body. However, this era was too backward. There was no specially formulated nutrient solution, no professional training equipment, no suitable training grounds, and even the people who participated in the training were not even as good as the children of her era in all aspects. She had deleted and modified her own standards over and over again to come up with the finished product today. However, in her eyes the training content was already very relaxed, but in Suku's eyes, it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Of course, he wasn't thinking about how amazing Jiang Pingji's training techniques were, nor was he surprised at how exceptional the training plan was. He wasn't even praising Jiang Pingji's prowess. Instead, he was regretting. Did a donkey kick him in the head last night? Why did she feel that the person in front of her was a kind and gentle lord? Langjun, you mustn't do that. Those servants are just ordinary people. This kind of torture. Unconsciously, Suku voiced out his most honest opinion of the plan. As soon as the words left his mouth, his expression changed. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. She understood what Suku meant, and her face turned green. Wait, he said torture? The two of them looked at each other. In the eyes of the livestream viewers, they were dumbstruck. Tudu Feichio, #PickNose1. What kind of training plan did the host come up with? Young Su seems to be scared silly. Hongyan Yuntian, haha streamer, there's something wrong with this time travel script. Shouldn't the plot be about Suku holding the training plan with both hands and being amazed by it, then being subdued by the host's domineering aura, kowtowing to the host and becoming a brain-dead fan? Hit me if you don't agree, you're right. I'm ready to witness the historic scene of the post-starter subduing his underlings. Why did the two of them end up looking at each other dumbstruck? This scene was so King awkward. Looking at the screen full of ha ha ha, Jiang Pingji was multitasking expressionlessly. She stared at Suku and the scrolling comments on the screen. To paraphrase the audience, if he didn't follow the script, it would be really awkward. Is it really that harsh? She picked up the training book that Suku dropped in shock. How could it become the torture you mentioned? Suku could hear the gloominess in Jiang Pingji's tone. His heart sank and he realized that he might have misunderstood her. He deliberated and said, Langjun was born with divine strength, and your talent is different from ordinary people. The contents listed above are naturally nothing to you. However, those slaves that were bought are all ordinary people. How can the flesh of ordinary people compare to yours? Seeing him carefully flatter her and then tactfully say that the standards for the content were too strict, Jiang Pingji's gloominess dissipated. In your opinion, what is appropriate? Jiang Pingji's tone was calm, and there was a serious look in her eyes. It showed that she was sincerely asking for advice, and not trying to get even with him later. Suku hesitated for a while and instead of answering he asked, Langjun, why are you spending so much effort? You may have heard from the slaves about what happened to me a few days ago. I don't want to go through that kind of situation again in my life. Training these servants is to find a place for myself to settle down. Dongqing seems to be peaceful now, but even a place like Hejin County is full of bandits. If I don't have a place to settle down, I may be killed one day. As soon as Jiang Pingji finished speaking, Suku suddenly shook his head and retorted, Langjun, do you really only care about this? If it's just to clean up the bandits and protect the house, 30 to 50 people are enough. Why do you need to mobilize so many people? I'm afraid you have other unspeakable thoughts. Since you said it's unspeakable thoughts, how can I answer your question directly? Suku was speechless. He didn't expect Jiang Pingji to be so unpredictable. There was another burst of laughter on the screen, but this time it was not Jiang Pingji who was laughing at her. Instead, they all felt sorry for Suku. Hit me if you're not convinced. The longest road that Suku has walked in his life is definitely the streamer's unconventional ways. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, young Suku, give it a rub. The streamer doesn't care about you, but Auntie cares about you. Carry me away, kiss me. The price of a blue and white asterisk was equivalent to a lollipop and a lover's heart, and one asterisk was equivalent to one livestream coin. Badeo President. Young Suku, don't be lured away by that weird auntie. Come into my arms. Domineering President, tipped 520 kidney apples. One kidney apple was equivalent to one livestream coin. 520 kidney apples were 520 livestream coins. Apart from these two people, there were even more rewards. The screen was full of rewards that almost drowned Jiang Pingji's vision. The backstage notifications came one after another, densely packed, with no signs of stopping. Fortunately, she was expressionless, so no one saw through her. Suku didn't know that thousands of people had taken turns to feel sorry for him countless times. His face, which was gradually becoming more determined, showed a trace of a strange expression. His eyes were especially bright and eye-catching. I already understand what you're thinking, Langjun. I won't let you down. Okay, you think about it. Seeing that, Jiang Pingji already knew what Suku was thinking, but she didn't point it out. Afternoon, you'll go out with me to have a look. We'll have a preliminary plan, so it'll be easier to carry it out in the future. She originally planned to let Suku carry out the plan, but now there was a situation, and the standards she set were still too strict. One person is better than two. Suku knew the level of ordinary people in ancient times better than she did, so his suggestion was worth taking. According to my initial plan, we should do it step by step, increasing the difficulty of the training step by step. Just as Jiang Pingji finished, Suku's heart was sweating profusely. Recalling the contents of the booklet, he couldn't imagine how terrifying the intensity of the training would be if it was done step by step. It wasn't training tigers and wolves, it was clearly training people to death. Chapter 78. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Those with potential are still young, but the older ones don't have enough nutrition, and their overall quality is not good. If they are forced to meet the training standards, they might be lying on the road to training before they become a strong army. However, Jiang Pingji's family was very rich. They didn't have many things, but they had enough food to fill their stomachs. Currently, there were only a dozen or so servants in the farm. She could afford to feed them. I carefully read what you wrote. Although it is harsh, there are some good points in it. Suku was worried that Jiang Pingji would be angry, but after careful observation he didn't see any displeasure on her face, so he plucked up his courage and continued, the so-called elite troops are no less than elite weapons, and there are even more elite soldiers. What are elite soldiers? They are strong, fierce, and good at fighting. Strict discipline, strict laws, and strict execution of orders are the second. In my opinion, the latter is the most important. No matter how strong a soldier was, he was only one person and he could only exert the strength of one person. But if 100 people acted as one, moved in unison, and exerted their strength in one place, what would the result be? Although every training item in Jiang Pingji's plan was frighteningly harsh, and it didn't seem like it could be completed by a normal person, Suku only read it once, but he still found something she emphasized, discipline. Jiang Pingji nodded approvingly. Suku's performance was much better than she had imagined. Indeed. I read a novel a few days ago. The content was about a fierce general of the previous dynasty who could come in and out of the chaotic army as if there was no one there. His heroic posture was like that of a god, and the army couldn't touch him. But in my opinion it is a bit ridiculous. Suku was slightly stunned by Jiang Pingji's arrogant words. Although it was only a few words, he could tell who the fierce general of the previous dynasty was, so he was even more confused. That was the peerless general who had followed Emperor Taizu of the Xia dynasty to war, the god of war who had created an extraordinary career, Meng Ziliang. You don't believe me? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. She stood up and took down the bow and arrows. She said to Su Ku, "Why do you think it's the general who is too brave and not the enemy who is too useless? In my opinion, it's just a normal elite soldier running into a bunch of idiots. If he was a real tiger, wolf, or lion, how could he have fallen into the awkward situation of a group of dragons without a leader and allowed a mortal with a body of flesh and blood to move freely in the army formation? Was it because the horse beneath him was as fast as lightning, and even the arrows couldn't catch up? Or could it be that his body was made of copper and iron and was impervious to swords and spears? They're just a bunch of cowards who have no discipline, no desire to win, and only fear death. Ants could even bite an elephant to death. How could an army of 10,000 people not be able to stop a mortal with flesh and blood? Even if Jiang Pingji was in her previous life, she wouldn't dare to say that she could face tens of thousands of blades and escape unscathed. What she wanted were tigers, wolves, and lions. Those were people who would truly put their heads on their waistbands and fight to the death. Not to mention a general riding a white horse. Even a giant riding an elephant would be chopped into minced meat by a flurry of knives. Su Ku's rationality told him that what Jiang Pingji said was too idealistic and too absurd. However, when he thought of the scene of 10,000 people acting as one, orderly and disciplined, he couldn't help but feel his blood boil. Even his brain began to heat up. Cafeteria Dafinanti, the young man is done for. Badeo Zhangzi, this streamer is poisonous. She's contagious. San Shasha, is Su Ku possessed by a Chinibu? It feels like his eyes are glowing. Nongfu Shanquan Yudiangshuan, I don't care. I just love the streamer who is in the late stage of Chinibu. Jiang Pingji sneaked a peek at the comments on the bullet screen. The little bit of blood that had just risen was instantly extinguished. Instead, there was a sweet feeling of awkwardness and helplessness in her heart. If there was a king who ruined the atmosphere, it would definitely be the audience who laughed all day long. She raised her hand and patted Su Ku, who was immersed in the hot blood, and said in a hoarse voice, "Where was I just now?" "Continue, Su Ku." His blood was not boiling yet. It was very inhumane to pat him halfway to wake him up. Did you understand? Although Jiang Pingji said it lightly, it was no different from wishful thinking to achieve that step with the current conditions. Strict enforcement of orders and prohibitions. This phrase seemed to be simple, but it was very difficult to achieve. The first problem was the ridiculously high illiteracy rate in this era. If they could not even fully understand the orders, how could they carry them out accurately? The second problem was the ridiculously low execution rate in this era. As mentioned before, there were as many as 350,000 people participating in a war. The real deciding factor might not even be 50,000 people. What were the other 300,000 people for? Basically, they were there to do nothing, to gain experience and military merits, or to fish in troubled waters, just to fill their stomachs with military pay. If their side won, they would charge forward while they had the advantage of numbers. If they lost, they would turn around and run away. Apart from those who did nothing, the remaining 50,000 elite troops were very unqualified in Jiang Pingji's eyes. They were far from the standard of tigers, wolves, and lions. In the chaos, the elite troops might be able to suppress their inner fear of death and carry out the orders of their superiors. Of course, this possibility was very small. It was more likely that they would take advantage of the chaos to become deserters and only care about their own lives. This was because after the army was defeated, the first to bear the brunt of being demoted was the leader, not the large number of troops. Because of this, in ancient times, the morale of the troops was very important. Otherwise, it would be extremely easy for the troops to be disorganized and unable to recover after a setback. Unless they encountered an enemy who was more dispirited than them, if the difference in the number of troops between the two sides was not big, their side would definitely lose. However, at the end of the day, to put it bluntly, there was only one word: discipline. When a group of disciplined sheep met a group of disorganized wolves, they would win without any suspense. After a deep conversation, Su Ku's eyes opened wider and wider. The way he looked at Jiang Pingji from time to time was a bit fiery. At first, he only thought that she was just an ordinary aristocratic family's son who was greedy for beauty. Later, after the incident at the assembly, she bravely stood up for him. Su Ku labeled Jiang Pingji as quite powerful, arrogant and unruly, and dissolute. After what happened last night, He felt that she was shrewd and seemed to have everything under her control, including people's hearts. Now, his impression of her was refreshed again. If Suku had been a little unwilling before, he had now completely put away his previous attitude and understood his position. Even if he was just a layman, just by listening to her talk, he felt that the small military formation she mentioned was very feasible. Indeed, the person in front of him was going to do something big. Dongqing had not completely fallen into chaos yet, but she was already thinking about how to do it. Chapter 79. After experiencing his mother's unjust death and the fact that he almost died of injustice, Suku's impression of the aristocratic families had dropped to the lowest level. When he lost all his dignity and was manipulated like a commodity by the human traffickers, he had even fantasized crazily that if he could rise to prominence one day, he would definitely take revenge on those vermin of the country who did not know the suffering of the people and had no regard for human life. However, these thoughts were just thoughts. Not to mention those aristocratic families with deep foundations, even the local gentry could easily control his life and death, let alone the fact that he was now just an official slave. He had gone from a commoner to a lowly commoner, and there was an irremovable mark of humiliation on his face. He had long since lost all hope in this life. However, due to a freak combination of factors, it was bought by this special Langjun from an aristocratic family. It was as if a completely different life door had been opened. Suku had thought that he was arrogant, and couldn't bear to listen to any unpleasant words, but in fact he was surprisingly easy to talk to. Of course, Suku wouldn't treat this Langjun as a harmless little rabbit just because he had taken his advice several times. Not only was the other party not a harmless bunny, it was a silent tiger that seemed to be resting lazily but was actually extremely dangerous. She took his advice only because it was useful. Even so, Jiang Pingji's reaction was beyond Suku's expectation. To describe it in modern terms, it would probably be, this young master of the aristocratic family was different from those coquettish wretches outside. He was exceptionally pure and unpretentious. For example, now, he didn't understand. Langjun was the only legitimate son of the second branch of the Liu family. According to the gossip of the other servants, the second branch of the Liu family was extremely rich. So, as a noble scholar, how could she know the price of rice, vegetables, and fruits so clearly? He even remembered the prices in the last few days? At most, he would praise Liu Langjun for having an outstanding memory, for having a photographic memory, and for being able to recall what he heard. But, why was he smiling and bargaining with the merchants like an ordinary farmer? That stingy bargaining technique stunned him. He couldn't help but have an illusion that the second branch of the Liu family was so poor that they couldn't even feed themselves. Suku wasn't the only one who was dumbfounded. The audience watching the live broadcast were also so shocked that they dropped the melons in their hands. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, what an almighty streamer. She's so cool even when she's haggling. Lanchue Yubuja, bargaining and whatnot, it feels super down to earth. But host, didn't you notice that he was about to cry? Wujiangja Kaiyi, ha, the shopkeepers who almost cried when the streamer tried to bargain with them. Hit me if you don't agree, I'm relieved. I'm thankful that the host isn't from this world. Otherwise it would be too scary. As an experienced clothing store owner, I felt that if I met such a troublesome customer, I would suffer a huge loss. I wouldn't be able to continue my business. A group of spectators expressed that Jiang Pingji was very good at bargaining. Although they felt sorry for the shop owner, they were still happy to watch the show. However, other than the onlookers who only knew how to laugh, there was also Suku. Langjun Yu. Suku wanted to say that she was calculative, but that was not a good word. He was also afraid of offending her, so he awkwardly said, "If this gets out, it will greatly damage your reputation." A noble son of an aristocratic family bargaining with a merchant. Even if he maintained his demeanor, it was inevitable that he would have a bad reputation if it got out. Jiang Pengji sneered and said carelessly, "You speak as if I, your Langjun, have a reputation? Who in Hejian County doesn't know the reputation of the Liu Manor's prodigal son? The manor does not lack money and rice, but you don't know how expensive it is if you don't manage the household." These merchants saw that I was dressed well, and I was young and ignorant, so they asked for an exorbitant price. They raised a price of 1 copper coin to 10 copper coins. Do I look like a fat sheep to you? Shou Shiguan, how can there be such a cruel sheep like the host in this world? It was the shopkeeper who was being ripped off. As soon as this comment came out, all the viewers who were watching the live broadcast immediately agreed. That was absolutely right. Suku silently looked up at the sky. After that day's fair, The reputation of his Lang Jun had indeed spread, but it was accompanied by the comments of the prodigal son. There were both praise and criticism. However, none of the masters in the manor cared, and the people involved even took the initiative to push the reputation onto themselves. Moreover, if I don't tell them my name, how will they know who I am? Even if they ask, I will only say that my name is Su Xiaoyu, and I am the servant of the Lu Manor's Lang Jun. As soon as Jiang Pingji said this, Su Ku, who was following behind her, almost stumbled and fell. Could it be that his main task in the Lu Manor was not to accompany her in her studies, but to help her Lang Jun be the scapegoat? After showing Su Ku around, Jiang Pingji asked again, "Have you memorized everything?" Su Ku nodded. Although his memory was not as good as Jiang Pingji's, he still had a photographic memory, so he remembered everything. That's good. In the future, you will be in charge of the farm's expenses and purchases. Make an account book and record everything. You have to be strict with their training. If anyone dares to slack off, you will be severely punished. There will be no room for mercy. If there is punishment, there will be rewards. For those who perform well, you should also be rewarded appropriately. We are still short on manpower, so it shouldn't be difficult to manage. Jiang Pingji bought Su Ku to be the accountant, manage the household affairs and supervise the training of the servants. One person could take on multiple roles. According to Lu Shi, he would not interfere in this matter, so she had to figure it out on her own. In fact, she did not need others to tell her what to do. Before Su Ku could answer, Jiang Pingji continued, "This is your training in training. Armchair strategizing is just empty talk. If you want to verify your own ideas, you have to put them into practice. You don't have to do everything yourself, but you have to be aware of it. You won't be deceived by your subordinates. Don't think that these purchases are simple. There is more to it than meets the eye." It was the same thing, but the quality was different and the price was different. It was hard to guarantee that no one would use shoddy goods to cheat him. Don't think that it was a small matter. What if you looked at the bigger picture and the more detailed picture? There were many ways to go about it. For a long time, Su Ku did not say a word. Instead, he looked at Jiang Pingji with surprise and suspicion. His eyes seemed to be overstepping his authority. Jiang Pingji asked, "What are you looking at?" Su Ku felt as if his worldview had been reshaped. His impression of the gentry's son had also been reset. He said gently, "I never thought that you would be so familiar with these household affairs." A gentry's son had a more detailed understanding of the prices of goods than a former commoner like him. He knew the prices of all the shops, stalls, taverns and eateries within a few miles. Wasn't he the pampered son of the inner house? Hey, you wanted to say that I haggled over every penny. What, you changed your mind in less than a quarter of an hour? Chapter 80. However, no matter how Su Ku thought about it, he did not seem to have said what he was thinking. However, he did not continue to think about it. He only thought that he had inadvertently let the cat out of the bag, so he immediately apologized. "Why do you have to make it so formal?" Jiang Pingji moved sideways and only accepted half of the bow. "Moreover, you did nothing wrong. If what happened just now was spread, people would definitely say that Lang Jun of the Lus is stingy and harsh." "You are right." Su Ku was right. She just did not care about her reputation. What did other people's words have to do with her? Su Ku said sullenly, "Even so, Lang Jun is open-minded and open-minded. I don't think you would care about other people's opinions." So, his previous persuasion was just nonsense to Jiang Pingji, and his unspoken criticism was a taboo. Jiang Pingji did not say anything. Her head hurt, so she poked the system. She complained, "System, I feel like the generation gap between him and me is too big. I don't think I blamed him just now, did I? Did he have to act like he was guilty and remorseful?" The system said, "Haha, this is probably the difference between a gentleman and a hooligan." Jiang Pingji was speechless. Damn it. Su Ku realized that his Lang Jun was not only familiar with all kinds of affairs, but she was also passionate about carpentry, which others thought was cheap and distracting. She had bought a lot of wood and tools when she went out. Was she going to do carpentry herself? But this time, no matter how many thoughts he had, he did not voice them. He chose to watch silently and wanted to know the deeper meaning behind his Langjuan's actions. He had a feeling that Jiang Pingji would not keep him confused for too long this time. Sitting outside the carriage, Su Ku looked down. His eyes fell on a familiar place and he could not help but be stunned. It had only been a few days, but he felt as if it had been a lifetime. That night, he had tried his best to escape from the prison, but he did not expect to be intercepted by Lu Shi and his men. Later he became Lu Shi's page boy. While they were still on the road, they could see smoke rising from the farmhouse from afar. They could vaguely see the silhouettes of people plowing the fields, a few children chasing and playing, and even a white-haired old farmer sitting at the entrance of the village, smoking from time to time, looking peaceful and leisurely. Jiang Pingji lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked into the distance. The audience in the streaming room could also see the high-definition live stream. Papa, don't hit me, it feels like my hometown. I remember when I was young, the village was not developed yet. When it was mealtime, smoke would rise from the chimneys of every house. When I saw this, I knew it was time to go back and eat. Tong Huashani say, yes. It's the same in my hometown. When he was young, he didn't have a kindergarten. He basically let them run around the mountains when he was crazy. But now there were only a few elderly people in the village. The younger ones had all gone out to work. Rensha Wanka Shoming, I grew up in the city. I've eaten pork, but I've never seen a live pig run. As soon as the topic was brought up, it seemed that the whole live stream instantly entered into a nostalgic theme. They all talked about their childhood villages. Cutest husky, my village has been greatly improved. There are many small factories built. It's developed, but I can't see the scene in my childhood memory anymore. I can't see the blue sky anymore. The fields are so barren that weeds are growing. Jiang Pingji sat in the carriage with one hand on the table. She was bored and looked at the scenery outside or read the comments to kill time. The coachman drove the carriage skillfully and tried his best to reduce the vibration so that the nobles in the carriage would not feel uncomfortable. Su Ku, who was outside, said in a low voice, Langjun, we've arrived. Jiang Pingji came back to her senses and got out of the carriage. She avoided Su Ku's attempt to help her up and jumped down. For convenience, she had changed out of the fluttering, wide-sleeved cloak and replaced it with a simple and refined brown dress. To be honest, she had had enough of wearing the complicated anti-human open-crotch dress. What's the use of tightly wrapped clothes? There was still air underneath. Let's go. Jiang Pingji said with a smile and led the way forward. The children who were playing saw the strangers coming and ran back, laughing. The audience in the live streaming room felt that the village scene was familiar and warm, but it was a new experience for Jiang Pingji, who was used to cold cities and advanced machinery. It was as if her cold and lonely heart was warmed by the scene. They were dressed very simply. Jiang Pingji wore the brown dress that commoners often wore, which made her look very low-key. Fortunately, the carriage had the emblem of the Lus on it. Although the head of the village had never seen Jiang Pingji before, he knew that the person in the carriage must be from the main family. When he learned that the young man in brown was the second Langjun of the Lus, he was so scared that he did not dare to speak. Relax. I'm just here to see the people who were sent to the village a few days ago. Did any of them try to escape these days? After asking the head of the village, Jiang Pingji looked at Su Ku, who looked embarrassed. Even if Lu Shi had not sent people to stop them, Su Ku would not have been able to escape from the boundaries of the farm. Jiang Pingji had also sent people to keep an eye on him. The head of the village knelt down obediently and answered with fear. He was afraid that he would offend the Langjun and bring trouble to the village. Dongqing seemed to be peaceful, but corrupt officials were running rampant. The gentry in the villages exploited the people. How could the commoners live a peaceful life? Too many people lived in misery. Not only did they have to bear heavy taxes, but they also had to face bandits. In comparison, the tenants in the farm lived a very comfortable life. Everyone in the surrounding villages was envious of them. The main family was kind and had the advantage of money. The bandits did not dare to come and take advantage of them. Most of the tenants lived a happy life. If they did not serve the guests well and angered the Langjun of the main family, they would have a hard time in the future. Except for Su Ku, who was taken away, the rest of the people who were sent to the village were arranged to stay in the farm. Because they did not have specific instructions, they did not dare to make decisions. They only sent a few farmers to keep an eye on them in case any of them escaped. It's good that they did not escape. Go and get those people here. Jiang Pingji said to the head of the village and then turned to Su Ku. You will have to work hard for the next few days. Stay in the farm for some time and keep an eye on them for training. When everything is on the right track, you will be assigned to someone you can trust. I will allow you to borrow some books from the study of the Lu's house while you are staying in the farm. In case you fall behind in your studies. Work and study were two different things. Su Ku was still young, so he had to focus on his studies. He could not neglect one thing. A subordinate who could not improve himself at any time was not a good subordinate. Although she did not show it, Jiang Pingji was treating Su Ku like an assistant in the internal affairs of the army in her previous life. Chapter 81. The internet provides you with wonderful novels to read. Jiang Pingji was very clear about her position, be it in her previous or current life. She used to be the leader of the whole army, the core pillar of the army, the belief of all the soldiers and the confidence of the whole army. Ahem, in layman's terms, she was the mascot in times of peace and the alpha wolf in times of war. She was in charge of the war, and the internal affairs and diplomatic contacts of the army were handed over to her assistants. She was a slacker in one of the subjects. War was her home field and she was not good at other things. She could not blindly command others, could she? Now that she had given Su Ku the authority to manage the internal affairs and personnel, she naturally would not command others in this area. If Su Ku could not control the situation, it would not be too late for her to intervene. Jiang Pingji and Su Ku formulated a detailed training process and stages based on the principle of making full use of the resources and progressing step by step. The initial training period was not long, and the tasks were not heavy. They were given enough time to adapt. After they had fully adapted, the intensity of the training and other activities would be gradually increased. When they were not training, they would cultivate the fields, work in the fields, or help the other tenants of the farm. In order to stimulate the motivation of the training, they were divided into groups of 5, and each group would select a corporal. The corporal would receive more than half of the monthly allowance than the others. Of course, the corporal was not fixed. There would be a selection every month and the best performance would win. There was also a competition between the groups, and the group with the best performance would receive an extra half of the monthly allowance. There were rewards and punishments, and the punishments were more severe than the rewards. There was a monthly examination, and the worst performance would be deducted 10% of the monthly allowance, and the training tasks for the next half month would be 10% more than the others. The group with the worst overall performance would be deducted 10% of the monthly allowance, and the training tasks for the next half month would be 10% more than the others. In addition, if an ordinary person made a mistake or caused trouble, the whole group would be punished. If the corporal deliberately caused trouble, the whole group would be punished. These few rules seemed simple, but in fact they formed a relationship of supervision and restraint between the corporals, and the corporals. The corporals enjoyed more benefits, but they also had to bear more responsibilities. They shared weal and woe with each other. They seemed independent, but in fact they were one. Jiang Pingji and Su Ku had a detailed discussion about the amount of silver each person would receive each month. After consulting various sources, they finally decided on the amount. Not long after, the head of the village came over with a group of people. Looking at those people's spirit and appearance, they were indeed better than when they were in the broker house. I bought you from the broker house for a reason, not to let you come here to enjoy life. I'll cut to the chase. No matter what you do in the future, you'll have to listen to Su Ku's orders. If anyone tries to cause trouble, don't blame me for being ruthless. Su Ku? Many of the servants had heard of this name and knew who Su Ku was. Hearing this name, some of the bolder ones couldn't help but raise their heads slightly. They found that Su Ku, who was originally just like them, or even more down and out than they were, was now dressed appropriately. His appearance was also more plump than a few days ago, and his spirit was not the same as before. For a moment, many people felt jealous and envious. However, before they could think further, Jiang Pingji's words were like a basin of cold water splashing over their faces. It was a very small scene, but Su Ku's hands were slightly trembling with excitement, and his expression was hidden in the shadows. I'm not a ruthless master. If you're dissatisfied, you can say it. If it's reasonable, I'll listen. If it's unreasonable, then shut up. Jiang Pingji glanced at everyone with indifference that made people dare not look directly at her. She gave Su Ku a wink, and the young man understood and went forward to explain the training in detail. Hearing that they could eat and wear warm clothes every day and they could get extra monthly silver, those people were all happy. Nowadays, it was not easy to survive in this world. There were natural and man-made disasters that forced people to have no way to live. Hejin County was still prosperous, but some other poor counties were full of starvation and bandits. In some serious places, 9 out of 10 houses were even empty. After they were bought, they found that Su Ku was gone the next day. They were worried for many days, for they were afraid of being implicated by Su Ku. Now that the dust had settled, Su Ku, who they thought had been beaten to death, was standing in front of them. The fierce master in their imagination was actually kind and gentle. For a moment, many people breathed a sigh of relief. As for the training, it was all physical work, so it should not be too tiring. Jiang Pingji saw that they were relieved. She smiled and said coldly, "The loos don't raise useless people, and the monthly silver is not that easy to get. I didn't buy all of you just to guard the house, and it's not something that can be dismissed with just a few superficial tricks." The young man's voice was mostly immature, but when they heard Jiang Pingji's words, they felt that the air was stagnant and cold. Their backs were covered in cold sweat, and a chill spread from the soles of their feet to their brains. Unspeakable fear lingered in their hearts. Although Hejian County is prosperous, there are also mountain bandits in the nearby mountains. They are evil bandits who rob houses, and they are the enemies you'll have to deal with after your training. You can train carelessly and not take it to heart, and then use this kind of training results to fool me. However, in the future when you meet those vicious bandits, they will not be merciful because of this and let you live. As soon as Jiang Pingji said that, Suku could not help but raise his head to look at her. He was a little surprised. But that was not what they had agreed on beforehand? However, the thin, immature boy with his hands behind his back was particularly dazzling under the sun. Not only was Suku obsessed with the scene, but there were also fangirls in the streaming room who kept sending gifts. Tudu Feichio, the streamer is so handsome that I can't close my legs. QWQ. Jindo Xianyu is poisonous in the chrysanthemum. I really want to be pressed on the ground by the streamer. I use strength. Yeah. Die. Jinginiang, upstairs, if you continue like this, you will lead the children astray. The system laughed so hard that its eyes could not be seen. The depression it had been feeling for the past few days had all dissipated. It didn't matter if the streamer's style was strange. Anyway, the audience was generous and the streaming was getting better and better. Ignoring the panicked expressions of the crowd, Jiang Pingji smiled coldly. The Lu family does not raise useless people, and I, Lu Shi, do not need a group of useless people to be an eyesore in front of me. I will give you 3 months. When the time comes, the bandits will die or you will die. It is all up to you. A wolf that had not seen blood might be weaker than a lamb that had seen blood. Jiang Pingji wanted to train a group of bloodthirsty tigers and wolves, not a group of sheep that could only perform acrobatics. Chapter 82. Jiang Pingji was shorter than everyone there, but her aura easily crushed everyone. Suku stared at her. In a trance he saw a fierce tiger with a strong body. Blood and flesh hung from the corners of its mouth. Its muscles were tense, ready to strike, and it was staring at its prey. Her eyes were fierce and cold. Being stared at by her, it was as if he was already destined to die. When he came back to his senses, the other party was still a young man bathed in sunlight. His black hair reflected the light, and there was a halo around him. After a while, although everyone was trembling in fear and their teeth were chattering, no one had the courage to raise any objections. The corners of Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a cold smile. She squinted her eyes, revealing her slender and long eyes. A trace of mischievousness and interest flashed across her eyes. Since there are no objections, let's begin. She raised her hand and threw the sandalwood fan in Suku's direction. Suku instinctively reached out to catch it. The familiar fragrance on the fan made his whole body tremble. He subconsciously thought of Lu Shi's cold and venomous eyes that night. It couldn't be helped, he had been traumatized. No, now was not the time to be afraid. His Langjun had said to start. What start? Was this part of the process set up at the beginning? Before the confused Suku could figure out what start meant, Jiang Pingji's next words almost scared him half to death. Jiang Pingji said leisurely. Suku's heart skipped a beat. I will choose the first batch of sergeants. I will be fair and impartial. She continued, I know that some of you are already thinking of retreating, afraid that you will lose your life in the hands of a ruthless bandit. However, the indenture that concerns your lives is in my hands, so you don't dare to act rashly. Now I will give you a chance. Whoever defeats me, I will release their indenture, return their freedom, and give them a year's worth of silver. After a long time, Suku's deepest impression of Jiang Pingji would be the image of her curling her thin lips and shining eyes under the afternoon sun. Come at me one by one or all at once. You don't have to be restrained. Life and death are up to fate. It's all up to the will of heaven. As soon as she said that, the crowd became restless. They didn't expect Jiang Pingji to be so arrogant. They were all children of poor families. They had been working in the field since they were young, so they were naturally strong. Even though Jiang Pingji was the son of the noble first wife of the Lu family, and she might have trained with a martial arts master to strengthen her body, but she was thin and weak. She looked like a chicken without much meat. No matter how you looked at it, she couldn't be compared to them, could she? If he won against her, he would be able to get back the indenture and even get a year's worth of silver? Was there really such a good thing? Everyone looked at each other in dismay, their steps hesitating. No one dared to take the lead, fearing that this was just a trap to test them. Suku was anxious. He wanted to pull Jiang Pingji back, but he was afraid of offending her. If he did nothing, what would he do if she was injured by those reckless men? To be more serious, what if he was beaten to death by random punches? His heart was restless, as if there was a small tongue of fire licking his heart, causing him to feel even more anxious and tormented. However, in the next moment, he inadvertently saw the smile on the corner of her lips. Her eyes revealed a look of anticipation. Suku suddenly stopped in his tracks. He couldn't help but think of that day at the gathering. Jiang Pingji had also teased the crowd in the same way. There was a look of disdain in the depths of her eyes. That was a signal. She didn't take her opponents seriously at all. Thus he silently stopped. The atmosphere became more and more stagnant. Everyone felt as if there was a layer of seemingly thin, but in fact, extremely heavy stone pressing down on their hearts. It made them inexplicably nervous. Their breathing was heavy and hurried, and their backs were sweating profusely. It was as if they were bearing a weight that they couldn't bear. "None of you dare?" Jiang Pingji spoke appropriately. She picked a sensitive time when the pressure in everyone's hearts had reached its limit. As soon as she finished speaking, an adult man with slightly red eyes dashed out of the crowd. He was the most muscular of all the servants, and he was also the strongest. He waved a fist that was as large as a boulder and directly attacked Jiang Pingji's face, bringing with it a strong gust of wind. "Finally, there's someone with guts." Jiang Pingji laughed softly. She didn't care about the fist at all. The head of the manor was already so scared that his chest was beating wildly. He almost couldn't keep up with the rhythm of his breathing. Suku couldn't bear to look at it, so he tilted his head to avoid eye contact. Everyone in the streaming room subconsciously held their breath and clenched their fists slightly. At that moment, some people were complaining about why the streaming screen was so high definition. It made them feel as if the fist would break through the screen and directly hit their faces. Some of the more timid ones were even mentally prepared for the streamer to be splattered with blood on the spot. Many streamers liked to do things that courted death in order to attract popularity. They didn't expect Jiang Pingji to follow in their footsteps. Among the people present, the ones who were least worried were the minority of the streaming audience who had seen Jiang Pingji's valiant fighting ability. While everyone else was trembling with fear, they were the only ones who were excited and opened their eyes wide, afraid that they would miss any exciting moment. Good move. Faced with the menacing fist, Jiang Pingji didn't dodge. Instead, she took a step forward and directly met the opponent head-on. She used her side palm to block the opponent's wrist and offset most of the force. Then she used her palm to shake off the opponent's wrist. She opened her palm wide and grabbed the opponent's arm. She turned around and used the opponent's strength to fight back. Her movements were simple, but she used the force to the extreme. After all, these were the servants who had to be trained. She couldn't just punch them until they were unconscious. Who would train them if they were lying on the mattresses moaning and moaning? Therefore, Jiang Pingji only wanted to teach them a little lesson. She just needed to beat them until they were completely convinced. The 7th Corps was bellicose. Not only was their slogan "cause trouble," but they also had some bad habits that outsiders thought were very rude. Every year, 99% of the new recruits had to go through the recruit baptism. To put it bluntly, it was to go against the veterans and then be ruthlessly beaten up. Young people were always hot-tempered. They had to be beaten up. Otherwise, it would be difficult to discipline them in the future. Similarly, these servants each had their own thoughts. They might not take training seriously in the future, so they deserved to be beaten up. Instead of worrying about this problem in the future, it was better to beat them up now. For Jiang Pingji, there was nothing in this world that couldn't be solved with a good beating. If there was, she would beat them up again. The servant who was the first to act was like a signal. It made the hesitation in the hearts of the others dissipate instantly. Taking advantage of their momentary courage, they pounced on Jiang Pingji. They had the advantage in numbers. Were they afraid that they couldn't beat a young and weak Langjun from an aristocratic family? They didn't ask for anything else. They didn't want to beat her to death. After all, if they killed her, they would be buried with her. They only wanted to win against Jiang Pingji. As long as they won, she had made a promise in front of everyone. They dared not go back on their words for the sake of their pride. Chapter 83. The internet provides you with wonderful novels to read. More than a dozen people couldn't even touch the hem of Jiang Pingji's clothes, let alone cause her any trouble. They had no combat discipline, no sense of cooperation, and no tactics to speak of. They only knew how to rush around like headless flies. Not only could they not exert the strength of 1 + 1 = 2, but they were also holding each other back. Jiang Pingji had no difficulty in dealing with them. Corpses were constantly being thrown to the ground with dull thuds. Su Ku opened his eyes slightly and saw Jiang Pingji in a plain brown robe strolling among the crowd. Her movements were simple, but she had the demeanor of a master. I've never seen anyone weaker than you. You want to suppress bandits? Why don't you go buy an embroidery brush and stay in the house to learn how to do needlework? With this kind of ability, if I take you to suppress bandits, you won't even be enough to kill one person. Jiang Pingji had perfect control of her strength. She didn't injure or cripple them. However, they wouldn't be able to stand up and fight with her for a while. His venomous tongue was unleashed, stomping on wherever it hurt. The men were red in the face as if living in the world was a waste of food, and committing suicide out of shame would pollute the land. Look at you. You're all so weak. Your legs are like noodles. You can't even stand straight. You'll fall if you stumble. You'll lie on the ground and wail for a long time. Did you not eat enough during the day? Or did you lose your body on a woman at night? Or did you sleep too much in bed? Jiang Pingji sarcastically said. She never paid attention to her limits, so she inadvertently used dirty words. Su Ku, a young boy, blushed. He looked at Jiang Pingji as if he was looking at a monster. How could such vulgar words come out of the mouth of a noble Langjun who was raised in a noble family? Jiang Pingji acted as if nothing had happened to Su Ku. She didn't think what she said was wrong. Was this standard vulgar, dirty, and violent? Then what about the fact that she had drunk alcohol and won the championship of the dirty stories competition? She tried to use elegant words to express herself. The system, which had been happy a moment ago, was now paralyzed on the sofa and couldn't take care of itself. With such a host, it was already a salted fish. The bystanders were dumbstruck, but there was a group of people who were so excited that they couldn't stop. Notifications flooded the screen, flipping page after page. Domineering president, rewarded 1314 kidney apples. Viewer, come and hit me if you're not convinced, rewarded 11 sets of 520 blue and white side items. Viewer, stupid network card crippled, rewarded 99 blue enchantresses. The most eye-catching thing was a huge firework that exploded on the virtual screen. The cool special effects almost occupied the entire screen. Viewer, so poor that only have money left, tipped a luxurious private yacht. Viewer, so poor that only have money left, tipped a luxurious private yacht. Viewer, so poor that only have money left, tipped a luxurious private yacht. The same announcement was repeated 9 times. The entire live broadcast room was silent for a second before it exploded. Tudu Feichio, wow, he's really a nouveau riche. He's so poor that he only has money left. 9 luxury private yachts. Cafeteria Dafinanti, nouveau riche, please hang me wherever you point me. Penguin girl, although there are very few people in our live broadcast room, there are many people who are stupid and rich. Smiley face 3, angle, underscore a luxurious private yacht was equivalent to 1,000 popularity points, which required 1,000 streaming coins. If converted to the currency of their dimension, it would be 1,000 renminbi. The nouveau riche rewarded 9 yachts in a row, which meant that he didn't even blink and directly threw in 9,000. 4 other popular live broadcast rooms, this bit of reward was nothing, but for this new live broadcast room, it was a rare large amount. Jiang Pingji was stunned. Looking at the points of popularity in her account, she secretly raised her eyebrows. She still didn't show her emotions. So poor that only have money left. The streamer is great. Reward her. Look, the nouveau riche was so indifferent. However, Jiang Pingji laughed coldly in her heart and threw it to the back of her head. There was no other reason. When the special firework reward filled the entire screen, the system issued a live broadcast task backstage. A song of colorful clothes dancing, the beauty's voice spread everywhere. Today there is a viewer, poor that only have money left, who wishes for the streamer to dance to a song. The dance is moving and the duration is not less than 10 minutes. Task reward, 9 luxurious private helicopters. Accept B, consider rejecting. The prices of the luxurious private helicopters and the luxurious private yachts were the same. They were virtual reward currency in the live broadcast room. In other words, if Jiang Pingji was willing to accept the task and dance in front of the live broadcast audience for 10 minutes to satisfy the nouveau riche and give a high evaluation, she could receive another 9,000 points of reward. After deducting the system's bonus, she could still get half of it. She didn't expect that before she could choose the semi-interactive mode or the fully interactive mode, the nouveau riche had already seriously studied the rules of the live broadcast room and issued a live broadcast task with a high reward. This was unique to the designated live broadcast mode. Before the system could scream in excitement, Jiang Pingji had already chosen to reject the task. The reward stored in the system was instantly refunded when the nouveau riche issued the task. Thus, its scream was like a duck that had been strangled by its neck. It stopped abruptly. It was hilarious. The system wailed, "Host, that's a total of 9,000 points of popularity. You can get it just by dancing." Jiang Pingji sternly stopped it. "Shut up." At the same time, a bullet screen notification was posted in her mind. "Host V, thank you for the love and enthusiasm of the audience, but the live broadcast room refuses to accept any content of the designated live broadcast mode. It's a matter of principle and has nothing to do with anything else." Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jiang Pingji briefly explained the voting rules for the semi-interactive mode and the fully interactive mode. Although the live broadcast without a clear theme was very interesting, it also lacked a sense of anticipation. After a long time, people would get tired. Moreover, there was no guarantee that interesting things would happen every time the live broadcast was free. Sometimes she felt that her days were boring and moldy, not to mention the audience sitting in front of the screen watching the live broadcast. The novelty of the live broadcast room could maintain the curiosity in their hearts, but it could not sustain their passion. Although Jiang Pingji was expressionless and there was no flaw in her eyes or expression, Su Ku, who was beside her, sensitively noticed that his Longjuan's good mood was inexplicably covered with a layer of dense fog. She seemed to be extremely unhappy. Could it be that Langjun was extremely disappointed in the people lying on the ground? Su Ku could not help but think more, but before he could figure it out, Jiang Pingji had already stepped forward and taken away the sandalwood fan that he was keeping. "You make arrangements for these people. We will go back to the mansion to discuss this at night. We will officially start training tomorrow. If they are still so useless, there is no need to keep them and waste food." Jiang Pingji's face was cold and stern, as if she was suppressing some kind of emotion. It made people subconsciously lower their heads, not daring to make a sound. Chapter 84. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. For some unknown reason, Lu Shi trusted and indulged his daughter. Apart from her studies, he rarely interfered with anything else. However, he still wanted to know the details. He was afraid that she would be taken advantage of. Obviously, Lu Shi's worry was unnecessary. How could Jiang Pingji be taken advantage of? Su Ku was a busy man. First, he made arrangements for the servants in the farm. Then he came back and had a heart-to-heart talk with Jiang Pingji. Before he could eat a hot meal, he was called over by Lu Shi, the head of the family. Because of the fear, Su Ku did not hide the details. He was eloquent and his narration was clear. Lu Shi sat at the head of the table and listened with his eyes closed. He seemed to be enjoying it. Behind the screen, Madame Hu smiled. Erling has really made a name for himself. Cousin can feel more at ease now. His daughter was praised, but as the head of the household, he could not be too proud. He could not hide his smile, but he still had to be humble. However, when Su Ku told her about how Jiang Pingji had provoked many of the reservists and said that she would send them to exterminate bandits after the training, Madame Hu was so shocked that she almost threw the snack back onto the plate. Lu Shi opened his eyes abruptly, and there was a hint of astonishment in his eyes. Madame Hu could not care less about her elegance. She said sternly, "A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. How could Erling be so impulsive?" In this regard, Lu Shi did not say anything. He only had a look of realization on his face that others could not understand. No one knew what he was thinking. Madame Hu's angry voice did not reach his ears. He felt like he was floating as if he was in another dimension. After a long time he gathered his thoughts. His face was pale. "All right, Lanting is no longer a 3-year-old. You know what you're doing." Lu Shi interrupted Madame Hu's order to stop Jiang Pingji. There was tiredness and an indescribable sharpness between his brows. Maybe this is fate. He went straight back to the main courtyard. The candlelight in the corridor flickered and flickered, elongating his shadow. Sitting in front of a few tables, Lu Shi spread out a great universal geographical map of Dongqing. A place was clearly marked on it. It was Hu County, which Lu Shi had once governed. He stared at Hu County for an hour, clenching his fists so tightly that a few crescent moon marks were left on his palms. After a long time, he said to the maidservant waiting outside the room, "Go and invite Lanting here." In ancient times, people worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Jiang Pingji was ready to go to bed with the help of her maids. "Let's go. Don't let father wait too long." She suddenly received a message from Lu Shi. She frowned and got up to take the warm and heavy cloak from Takshu. She put it on. She didn't know if it was because Lu Shi had returned, or if it was because of the revival of spring, which had injected vitality into the desolate Lu mansion. The landscape in the courtyard was a lot more luxuriant than when she had first arrived. It was just that the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The light was dim and the scenery was flickering. It was rather strange. When she reached the main courtyard, she bowed to Lu Shi. He waved at her and said gently, "Lanting, come forward." She took a few steps forward and sat down beside the table. She found her father staring at a great universal geographical map of Dongqing. Although it was a great universal geographical map, it was actually quite simple. Not to mention the rivers and mountains, even the size of the map was drawn in a mess. "Lanting, do you know where the county I was in was?" Lu Shi pushed the lamp on the table toward Jiang Pingji so that she could see more clearly. "I've been away from Hejian for the past few years. I've wondered if Lanting has any resentment. But I had no choice but to temporarily leave my homeland and my children." Jiang Pingji looked up at him suspiciously. She didn't understand why Lu Shi suddenly brought up this topic. "Father, you were in this place. It's called Hu County, but it's as big as a prefecture." Jiang Pingji answered the first question and avoided the second one. After all, she was not Lu Lanting. She was in no position to answer and she couldn't give an answer. Lu Shi caressed the Hu County on the great universal geographical map with his fair fingertips. "Yes, Hu County. Before I took office, it was a famous barren land in Dongqing. The government sent many high-ranking officials there, but they all died halfway or in office. It was a place of no return." It was not a bad thing to say that Hu County was barren. Since the end of the Xia dynasty, it had been a hard bone to chew. The land was vast, but it was overgrown with weeds. There had been a continuous drought for 10 years without a single drop of rain, which made it difficult for every household to survive. To survive, every able-bodied man in every household became roving bandits. They looted everywhere and sold their children. Those who had the means to escape from Hu County early. Even if they were worse off than pigs or dogs, it was better than being tortured in the hell that was Hu County. Not only that, but the disaster relief silver and food distributed by the court were exploited and bullied by the gentry. When they reached the hands of the people, they were left with rice mixed with 99% soil. It was the same every year. The gentry ran amok, the officials protected each other, and the roving bandits ran rampant. After the fall of the Xia dynasty, Dongqing took over the hard bone. Before Lu Shi, there was no lack of righteous officials who wanted to govern, but there was no exception. They all died. As a result, Lu Shi became the longest-serving county chief in Hu County. He was even worshipped by the local people as a god. "What happened to you, father? Why were you sent to such a dangerous place?" Jiang Pingji frowned. Hu County was notorious. Any young man who knew his place would not go to such a place to be an official. Wasn't that courting death? The Lu family was not considered the top family in Dongqing, but not everyone could look down on them. They should have connections in the bureaucracy. Lu Shi's answer was beyond Jiang Pingji's expectation. "I was willing to go to the edge of death to survive." Willing? He was willing to die? Or could it be that Lu Shi was certain that he would survive in Hu County? No, he was willing to go to the edge of death to survive? Was there really someone who wanted to kill Lu Shi? To others, Hu County is a place where death is certain. But to me, it is a blessed land that contains a sliver of hope. Lu Shi sighed with emotion. In his mind, he was dressed in sackcloth. He was grief-stricken as he hurried on his way with Amin's memorial tablet. At that time he had lost his son twice. Then his beloved wife was seriously ill. He was getting weaker day by day. There were all kinds of murderous intents staring at the small Lu residence. He was the only child left in his arms. He was at a loss. When he was at his most depressed, he even wanted to die. But Amin was right. Lanting was still alive. His enemy was still alive. He could not die yet. He only had a glimmer of hope when he went to Hu County. Chapter 85. Jiang Pingji was suspicious of the inexplicable test. She glanced at Lu Shi's face and then closed her eyes. It seemed like this cheap father of hers was hiding more secrets than she had imagined. But she was not a fool. Lu Shi's actions were not as simple as a test. It was more like he was trying to prove something. "I've studied Hu Commandery in detail as well. If you want to stay alive, it's not difficult." It was her father's place after all. Although the original Lu Lanting did not have much of an impression of her father, she was full of admiration for him. She desperately wanted to know everything about him, so there were many books and information about Hu County in her study. Hu County is a place where bandits are rampant. The gentry officials collude with each other and exploit the people. That's why they hate the officials sent by the court. Because of the special circumstances, Hu County's officials are hereditary. Sons inherit their father's position. It's almost like a country within a country. Jiang Pingji had always been violent. She would not complicate things if she could. It was very simple to stay alive and go to Hu County. Lu Shi's eyes shone. The confusion and hesitation on his face seemed to have dissipated. How is it not difficult? Bring 300 guards and 10 carts of money and grain. Don't rush to take up your post. Go and suppress the bandits first. Jiang Pingji said with a smile. Her eyes reflected the candlelight and shone brightly. One could not help but indulge in her confidence. The people of Hu County are tough. How can they be convinced by a letter from the imperial court? Only a strong army and force can intimidate the people. Only then can they not act rashly. Powerful soldiers have always been forged in blood. First, we will use the small group of bandits to test the waters. If they sincerely pledge allegiance to us, we can recruit them. If they resist, we will kill them without mercy. If necessary, we will kill them all. This is the name of a fierce army. They were bandits. No matter how ruthless they were, no one would be able to find fault with them. This seemingly nonsensical move was actually for the sake of secretly recruiting strong and useful people to expand his own strength. The second branch of the Lu family had a large business and plenty of money and food. It was enough for Lu Shi to play like this for a year or two. The squires and officials who tried to sharpen their knives, collude with the roving bandits, and assassinate him were all so scared that they did not dare to make a sound. They did not even dare to move. However, in order to avoid being suspected by the court, we can order some of the subdued roving bandits to sneak into the forest in disguise and continue to be his roving bandits. They can secretly pay attention to the movements of all parties, and they can also monitor the movements of the squires and officials. In short, the entire Hu County should be gradually devoured. Jiang Pingji's thoughts had not been thought through. It was just her first reaction. After fighting for so many years, it had become an instinct. They prioritized using force to solve problems. Hu Commandery was a tough nut to crack. If they weren't ruthless, they wouldn't be able to subdue them. Although the second branch of the Lu family was rich, they could not fully support the military. Therefore, it was a good way to save money by feeding on the enemy. Lu Shi's eyes grew brighter as Jiang Pingji spoke slowly. She pretended not to see it and lowered her eyes. Hu Commandery is so poor because of two reasons: man-made disasters and natural disasters. Man-made disasters can be solved, but natural disasters are not. Lu Shi seemed to have let go of something. He smiled and asked, "But Lanting, you seem to have a plan." "I have observed that one of the reasons why Hu Commandery is so poor is because of the drought. Most of the fields are dry and crops cannot grow." Jiang Pingji gestured to Hu Commandery on the Great Universal Geographical Map. However, Hu Commandery is a land of flowing water. Jiang Pingji had carefully read through the information Lu Lanting had collected. The girl seemed to be obsessed with becoming a man like her father. But the problem of Hu Commandery was right in front of her, and she could not figure it out. She did not know where to start. It was not a difficult problem for Jiang Pingji. As a genetic warrior, she had to adapt to different environments. She had to learn everything related to combat. Who knew she might be able to survive one day? She had even been trained to survive in the wilderness. She had been thrown into the abyss of death unarmed. There were 1,000 people who had participated in the training, but she was the only one who had survived. It was not a suitable place for humans to live. Humans needed food, air, and water. Apart from the general knowledge she had learned from books, the rest of her knowledge was accumulated through life and death struggles. Combined with the culture and customs of Hu Commandery, there were many descriptions of mountains and veins. She found some clues. Of course, underground water cannot alleviate the drought in Hu Commandery. Jiang Pingji's finger moved to a large river near Hu Commandery. It was known as the Mother River of Dongqing, but the river's embankment had collapsed all year round. Hu Commandery lacked water, but some places had so much water that people could drown. It was hard to say which was more fatal, flood or drought. It was a choice between dying of thirst or drowning. No matter which one was chosen, they would die. It was just that the method of death was different. The people born in Dongqing were unlucky. They did not have a single moment of peace in the whole year. First, dig underground water. After the disaster is alleviated, gather the people and use manpower to divert the water from the branch into the river in Hu Commandery. The main river could not be moved easily. If there was another flood and the river erupted, Lu Shi would be the one to blame. But it was not a problem to divert the water from the branch. It could reduce the work and shorten the time. Moreover, the branch was closer to Hu Commandery. Lucy smiled and asked, "This plan is feasible, but how can the people bear the burden of corvée labor?" Corvée labor was, to put it bluntly, unpaid manual labor. It was heavy and often resulted in murder cases. Moreover, it was difficult to motivate the people. Jiang Pengji thought about it and said, "What's so difficult about it? Promise the people some compensation and that they will be responsible for 3 meals of coarse grain. Also, promise that when the project is completed and the land is reclaimed, the government will provide farming tools and cattle. Every household will be able to reduce or exempt their taxes." With compensation, how could the people's enthusiasm be the same as free labor? Monetary compensation was the motivation and direction to move forward. Hu Commandery was a strange place. Dongqing had little control over it and all the laws were just lip service. If Lu Shi could settle down in Hu Commandery, it would be easy for him to reduce or even exempt taxes for a few years. It was a good deal to use the court's order to do him a favor. The people's reputation would belong to him. Lu Shi asked, "Such a huge project will require an uncountable amount of money. Where will the money come from? What's more, corvée labor has its own rules. If we really implement it, not only will we have to face the pressure of not having enough money, but we may also be impeached." Chapter 86. Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. She was cunning and said, "The officials love the people like they are their own children. Why can't they pay for it? The law doesn't punish the masses. The imperial court can't save the people, so why can't the people in Hu County save themselves? To put it bluntly, it was robbing the rich to help the poor. Opportunities are created by people. You'll only suffer if you stick to the rules." Her eyes flashed with interest. "Those rural gentry clans that have been entrenched in Hu County for hundreds of years are all filthy rich. How can good people like them be absent when it comes to benefiting the people? Aren't pigs fattened so that they can be slaughtered and eaten during the new year? They could always get something out of slaughtering them. As for how to make those Paishio spit out the money and rice, it's simple. Hu County does suffer from drought every year, but the root cause of the current situation is man-made. The imperial court provides relief money every year and reduces taxes every year, but what's the result? Natural disasters were scary, but the people's hearts were more frightening when they fought among themselves. They could resist natural disasters if they were united, but the man-made disaster was the reason why Hu County went from a chaotic and impoverished Xia dynasty to Dongqing. Let's not talk about this. Just look at the relief money allocated every year from the previous dynasty to Dongqing. It's definitely a huge loophole that can't be filled. Wait, is there still any doubt? If those people don't want to spit out what they ate, we can only resort to extreme measures. Whether it's falsifying accounts or pretending to be bandits, exterminating the family and confiscating the property, there must be a suitable method. The former method could at least save their lives, but the latter would be exterminated. There's nothing in this world that can't be solved with a knife. If there is, I'll do it again." Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes as she spoke. Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile, which was indescribably beautiful. It would be best if there was evidence, but if there was no evidence, she could only fabricate it. Extraordinary times called for extraordinary actions. Even a gentleman couldn't rigidly adhere to the rigid rules. If it didn't work, she could publicize it to the people. Lu Shi didn't have to do anything. The seething resentment would drive people to their deaths. To put it bluntly, if he wanted to govern Hu County well, he couldn't rely on being a gentleman. He wanted to be as much of a hooligan as he could be. If they were evil, he needed to be even more evil than them. If they didn't agree with him, they would start fighting and killing. However, to achieve this, the public must have a high reputation, and they must have a military force that the officials and gentry are afraid of. Otherwise, it will be extremely easy to die on the spot. What Jiang Pingji said was built on the foundation of absolute military force. If Lu Shi wanted to heal Hu County, he would inevitably anger the local tyrants and harm their interests. Men die for wealth and birds die for food. It was extremely normal for him to kill Lu Shi for his own benefit. It's not difficult to stay alive. Establishing a firm foothold and governing Hu County complement each other. Jiang Pingji's mouth was dry after saying so much. She secretly licked her dry lips with her tongue. Her eyes were bright and spirited. What did father do back then? Lu Shi smiled shyly. Just like my son. In other words, he had used the methods that Lu Lanting had used, but he was not as ruthless and decisive as she was. The methods he had used against the local gentry in Hu County seemed ruthless, and they had even given him the title of King of Hell behind his back. However, compared to Lu Lanting, his methods were tame and kind. No matter how ruthless Lu Shi was, he had at least let the gentry survive. Lu Lanting, on the other hand, had surrounded the residence of the gentry. She had killed every living thing in the residence. Not even a bird or a chicken was spared. Almost all the gentry in Hu County, except for those who had defected early on, had been killed by her. Lu Shi looked at Jiang Pingji with a complicated expression. Even though she did not look murderous and her eyes were clear, he was sure that she was not joking. Thinking of this, Lu Shi muttered, "But Lanting, you've forgotten something very important." Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. Her plan had been improvised, so it was normal for it to have loopholes. She had always been conceited, so when she heard that Lu Shi's plan would not work, she became interested. "Father, please advise me." Lu Shi did not speak. He wrote 2 words on the table with his index finger. Jiang Pingji's face darkened. He said, "Your plan is feasible, but have you ever thought that you will offend all the gentry clans by doing this? In today's era, insulting the emperor in public was worse than insulting the aristocratic families. The gentry clans were powerful. Jiang Pingji's plan could solve the problem in Hu County, but what should he do next? Put himself in a hostile position with all the gentry clans? What's more, most of the talented people nowadays come from the aristocratic families. Lu Shi stopped here and changed the topic. It's rare to see a few people from poor families. If we do as you say, have you ever thought about the consequences of being ostracized by them? In today's era, most of the resources were given to the gentry clans. They had a lot of money and knowledge, and the ratio of talents they nurtured was much higher than that of ordinary people. Innate talent was important, but so was the environment and education. If she offended all the gentry clans according to her plan, who would be willing to work for her if she rebelled in the future? Jiang Pingji's face darkened. She raised her head and looked at Lu Shi. There seemed to be an undercurrent in her dark eyes. "So what do you think we should do, father?" Jiang Pingji asked deliberately. Lu Shi said bluntly, "We can't offend them completely. They could be offended, but they could not become irreconcilable enemies. It was important to leave some leeway for others." Jiang Pingji pursed her lips and thought for a while. In the end, she said, "It is better to get rid of future troubles than to keep them around. There was nothing that could not be solved with a knife. If there was, then another knife. It was the same no matter who came." Lu Shi looked at Jiang Pingji with a complicated expression. After a long time, he let out a long sigh and said, "Lanting, I don't care what you're thinking or what you're going to do, but you must think twice before you act. Think about yourself and your family." After all, she was the second legitimate son of the Lu family in Hejian. With his reminder, Jiang Pingji reacted and responded, "I understand." Lu Shi did not dare to think about whether or not Jiang Pingji had really listened to him. Chapter 87. Forget it. Let's not talk about such a depressing matter. Lu Shi cut the conversation short. He did not want the father and son to get into an argument over something that did not even exist. Not to mention anything else, but his daughter's answer just now made him extremely satisfied and even proud. Emperor Qin of the Jiang dynasty was not to be underestimated. Lu Shi's expression did not change, but he had been thinking about it. Jiang Pingji secretly frowned and said, "Father is at home now. You should rest well. It's better not to worry too much." "If that's the case, I'll listen to you." Lu Shi smiled and shook his head. "I suddenly feel like eating egg custard." Jiang Pingji said coldly, "I'm not good at cooking." In fact, Lu Lanting's current body did not even know where the kitchen was. Jiang Pingji was used to eating all kinds of nutrient solutions. She did not mind stuffing them into her mouth as long as she could eat them. Survival was the most important thing. As for the only thing that was related to cooking, it was barbecue. "In that case, I'll cook for Lanting. Let's have a good drink together." Their relationship was strong. The topic was a little sensitive and the atmosphere was tense. They needed to ease up. Lu Shi was not the only one who thought so. Jiang Pingji agreed. It was just that, drinking wine while drinking egg custard, that was really too much. Besides, Lu Lanting's body was still that of an underage girl. Was it really okay to drink? It turned out that she was thinking too much. Lu Shi said he was going to cook, but he only knew how to make egg custard because the steps were simple. As for drinking, he only knew how to make pear blossom wine. The alcohol content was so low that Jiang Pingji could drink more than 10 jars without getting drunk. After only a few cups, Lu Shi's cheeks were already tinged with a slightly tipsy red. She looked down at the wine cup and then at Lu Shi. How could he get drunk? She didn't know that because Gu Min believed that alcohol could damage the liver, Lu Shi had isolated himself from alcohol and tobacco since he was a child. Before he turned 20, he would only drink wine on his wedding night. Later on, when he socialized with officials, he would drink tea instead. Now that Gu Min was gone, he would occasionally drink a few cups. A person's tolerance for alcohol depended on both talent and training. Lu Shi didn't have the talent, nor did he train. His body wasn't in good shape, and he was exhausted by the affairs of Hu County a few years ago. Even a few cups of low-alcohol pear blossom wine would make him slightly tipsy. As the saying went, it wasn't the wine that intoxicated him, but the wine that intoxicated him. Lu Shi deliberately wanted to get drunk and no one could stop him. After drinking a few more cups, he was already a little dizzy. His eyes were a little red from being drunk and his eyes were a little red. He and Jiang Pingji sat on the veranda in the courtyard. Your mother loved the pear trees in the courtyard. She often took care of them. The pear wine of the Lu residence became a must-have for guests. Once upon a time there was a swing under this tree. Your eldest brother was once in her arms, sitting on the swing and laughing happily. Even though the meaning of the pear tree was not good, Gu Min liked it. Lu Shi took advantage of the fact that he was slightly tipsy and supported his forehead with his hand. Hot tears rolled down his cheeks. He passed away when he was only 2 years old. Your mother's body was weak and I didn't want her to have multiple pregnancies, lest it hurt her body and her mind. After that, I raised her for 4 years before I had you and your second brother. Who knew that he would drown in a pond when he was 4 years old? Ever since you were born, your mother did everything herself. She taught you not to talk to strangers, not to go to the water and even to avoid the rocks. She was so careful but she still fell into her trap. Lu Shi's eyes were filled with hatred and murderous intent as he spoke of the past. Lanting, this woman in the backyard looks charming, but she's even more venomous than a snake or scorpion. Her ruthlessness is breathtaking. Jiang Pingji sipped her wine as she analyzed all the information she had gathered so far. Both of Lu Lanting's brothers were killed by the woman in the backyard. Lu Shi knew who the woman was, but he couldn't take revenge on her. He was even restrained by her, so he had to be careful. What was the motive for harming people? Could it be that she liked Lu Shi and killed his child out of jealousy? Jiang Pingji secretly glanced at Lu Shi. He was handsome and even middle-aged, he still looked elegant. He was even more mature and charming than the hairless kids. If it was a crime of passion, wouldn't it have been better to kill Gu Min? Gu Min, on the other hand, died of illness due to exhaustion. Lu Shi was slightly drunk. He squinted his eyes and looked very drunk. How can my daughter be like those mediocre women, practicing in a man's backyard? Jiang Pingji listened quietly. She didn't want to argue with a drunkard. She should be practicing with those men. Jiang Pingji almost choked on her wine and spat it out. Cheap father, have you forgotten your gender? Encouraging their daughter to kill her male compatriots like this, was there still any love for her compatriots? Feng Huayu is beautiful, but he is old-fashioned and vicious. He has beautiful wives and concubines at home, but he is not a good match. Jiang Pingji squinted at him. According to her observation, Feng Jin was just a chick. He had never taken a girl for a plunger. How could he have beautiful wives and concubines? Su Xiaoyu is beautiful, but he is rebellious and not easy to tame. He is an ingrate and not a good match. Jiang Pingji didn't understand. What did their character have to do with beauty? Shouldn't he reflect on himself when he's so obsessed with looks? She waited for Lu Shi to continue his drunken rampage, but he paused and turned his head to stare at Jiang Pingji. His eyes seemed to be shining. His movement was very sudden. If she was a timid person, she might have burst into tears and been scared out of her wits. Lu Shi was tipsy. Lanting, what do you think of Qing Yumo from Langya? Although he is a few years older than you, he is gentle and cautious. Who is Qing Yumo? She was a little suspicious, but according to the characteristics of Feng Jin and Suku, Qing Yumo was probably young and handsome. Not interested. Never heard of him. Then, what about Han Wenbin from Langya? She is young and beautiful, and her heart is exquisite. She carries herself with awe-inspiring righteousness. Is this cheap father trying to be a pimp? Thinking about what Lu Shi had said, Jiang Pingji couldn't help but sympathize with the youths who were targeted by him. Lu Shi sighed and said regretfully, why doesn't Lanting like it? Probably because they are not beautiful enough. Although she hadn't seen them before, they were all men. Their looks were definitely not good enough for her. She was obsessed with looks. It seemed that Lu Shi was also obsessed with looks, but she was more picky about it. The pupil had surpassed the master. Beautiful? Lu Shi tilted his head and thought for a long time. Many names floated in his muddled brain. Ever since he had his daughter, he had been thinking about marrying into the family. His daughter could not get married anyway. Not even a chance. No windows. Chapter 88. If he couldn't marry into her family, it would be better to follow his previous plan of marrying a wife and concubines, but secretly marrying a man to carry on the family line. The future Emperor Qin of the Jiang dynasty should be so willful and domineering. Even if she had 3 husbands and 4 attendants, others had to shut up. It was like a mother beating her son. There was no reason at all. No matter what, she couldn't let those jackals, wolves, tigers and leopards take advantage of her. Therefore, Lu Shi continued to recommend her with all his might, trying to get her to accept his recommendation. Beautiful? I have a candidate. How about Langya's Wei Zixiao? He was born with a romantic charm and looks like a beautiful woman. He is the immortal Gushi. Lu Shi raised his eyebrows at Jiang Pingji. His action seemed frivolous and meaningful, as if all men knew. If it had been someone else who made that gesture and gaze, a perverted expression would have appeared on their faces. However, it was Lu Shi. It had to be said that this was a world where looks mattered the most. When he made that gesture, it had a sense of elegance that made people's hearts sway. Jiang Pingji was embarrassed. She smiled and said, "Why are they all from Langya?" It made all the men in the world, except for those from Langya, look like they were dead. It seemed that her father was really drunk. It is said that Hejian County attracts all the beauties in the world, and Longhuan gathers the literary talents of the human world. Most of the noble ladies in Hejian County are from noble families. They are famous for their beauty and are praised in history books. Langya and Ganning County are full of wise counselors and ministers. They are the places where literary talents gather. Dongqing is the weakest of the 5 countries, but the other 4 countries see it as a thorn in their side. Isn't it because the 3 counties have many talented people? Lu Shi clapped his hands and laughed. Only those outstanding men are worthy of my son's beauty. Didn't Amin say that 2 smart and outstanding people will give birth to even more outstanding offspring? Jiang Pingji smiled and did not say anything. She poured wine and sipped on it. Not long after, Lu Shi, who was sitting on the other side of the table, breathed smoothly and fell asleep. The pear blossoms in the courtyard fell with the night wind, and some nautily fell into his hair. Sigh, I'm already drunk. Jiang Pingji finished the remaining jars of pear blossom wine and looked at the sky. She got up and gently carried Lu Shi, whose cheeks were red from sleep. Although he was an adult man, his weight was unimaginably light. It was as if his entire body was so thin that only a few bones remained. Lu Shi placed them on the mattress, then covered them with the blanket and tucked in the corners of the blanket. Under the candlelight, the shadows in Lu Shi's eyes were even more pronounced. They are indeed skinny beyond recognition. But what happened back then that caused the Lu residents to become like this? Jiang Pingji was hesitant. She frowned slightly and recalled the hard touch. It seemed that he was so skinny that only bones were left. As he stood up, his gaze fell on a corner of the room. Is that Gu Min's memorial tablet? She paused for a moment and then left Lu Shi's room. She closed the door and made sure that the night wind couldn't get in. She pulled the heavy cloak around her body and chose the shortest path to her courtyard. It was right across the inner garden of the Lu residence. There were lanterns hanging in the corridor. Although the illumination wasn't high, it wasn't enough to cause a fall. She even met a group of guards who were patrolling the night. There were 5 guards in a group. When they saw Jiang Pingji, they all stopped and saluted. Okay. She responded and then returned to her courtyard without looking back. This Lu residence isn't small, but it's hiding a lot of secrets. The water is deep. The corner of Jiang Pingji's lips curled up. In the darkness, there seemed to be a glimmer of light in her dark eyes. The next day, Lu Shi held his swollen and groggy head and lifted the blankets on his body. He sighed in his heart that his body was becoming more and more useless. A few glasses of pear blossom wine could make him faint. He couldn't remember how he had returned to his bedroom from the corridor the night before. He had just gotten up when the maid outside the room, who had heard the noise, asked gently, "Master, are you awake?" "Yes, I'm awake." Lu Shi lay back down and waited for his swollen head to get used to it before he sat up straight. He tidied up his appearance and made sure there was nothing wrong with him before he called for the maid who had been waiting outside the room. He had been married to Gu Min for a few years. It wasn't a long time, but they had been childhood sweethearts. Many of his habits had been influenced by her words and actions since he was a child. For example, for some of the more intimate and physical tasks, he would usually do it himself if he could. The maid entered the room in a line. Lucy took the handkerchief with a cold expression and washed his face with warm water. His muddled mind was completely sober. He didn't drink much. After another night, the smell of alcohol on him was almost non-existent. He put on his specially fumigated clothes, and the fragrance lingered around him. Unless it was Jiang Pingji with a sharp nose, no one would be able to tell if he had alcohol on his clothes. Dressed neatly, Lucy looked at the sky outside and silently estimated the time. Did Lanting come this morning? He had slept until the afternoon. No wonder his head hurt so much when he woke up. Drinking too much water would make one tired. Second Lang Jun came to pay his respects this morning, but he didn't let us disturb you when he saw you were sleeping soundly. Lucy was silent. Some scenes flashed through his mind. His face turned pale and he held back the urge to touch his forehead. His image as a noble father. Wasn't it all gone now? The maid lowered her head. She didn't dare to look above Lu Shi's chest. She kept a safe distance from him, so she didn't see Lu Shi's conflicted expression. He looked like he was smiling but he wasn't. He looked like he was crying but he wasn't. In other families, this kind of personal maid who served the master of the house would most likely be taken in when the mistress was unwell. Even if she didn't have a proper title, her status would definitely be different from that of an ordinary maid. It could be said that she had flown up the branches and turned into a phoenix. But this rule didn't apply to the Lu family. At least it didn't work on Lu Shi. The elders in the house all knew that. You can leave. I need some time alone. He really needed some time alone. Being carried by his young daughter like a princess, he felt that his image as a father had collapsed. When the maid left and the door was closed, Lu Shi mumbled to himself in front of his wife's memorial tablet. Is this the Qi attack that you mentioned, Amin? Outside the house, a few maids quietly left. One of them was beautiful and lively. She had been bought into the Lu family for less than half a year, but she was already full of vitality. Sister Tong, the master has been back for a few days. Why hasn't he gone to the backyard? The maidservant who was addressed as Sister Tong was an elder in the Lu residence. She was also a first-class maidservant who served Lu Shi. She was only in her early 20s but she always wore a straight face. She wore no makeup and she looked gloomy to everyone. The color of her clothes was also dark and gloomy. Chapter 89. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Master, you're just a maid. You have no right to comment on the affairs of the inner courtyard. Tong Sanyang's face was taut as she coldly sized up the little girl from head to toe, clearly seeing through the little girl's delusions. The maid's face turned pale, but she didn't dare to talk back to Tong Sanyang. Before Lu Shi came back, she had been in charge of all the affairs of the main courtyard. She wasn't a steward, but she was more like a steward. Even the old steward liked Tong Sanyang, saying that she was efficient and capable. The maid whispered timidly, I'm just worried. I heard that the place where Master came from is a barren land. Caring for Master? That's Madam's business. What does it have to do with you? Tong Sanyang was just short of direct sarcasm. Her eyes were filled with impatience and disdain. She had thought that the maid was a lively and lovely girl, but she was also an idiot with a big heart. The maid was about to defend herself when Tong Sanyang said bluntly, I know what you're thinking. Everyone has their own ambitions. You have your own legs. If you want to climb into the master's bed, who can stop you? I'm just giving you a piece of advice. If you don't want to die, give up. With that, Tong Sanyang snorted coldly and left with light steps. She was fast but not disorderly. Another idiot. Why didn't she use her brain to think about why all the maids in the mansion, regardless of their age except for the few in the second Longjuan's courtyard, all wore plain makeup and didn't even dare to wear a hairpin? Why were their clothes made of good material but not bright colors? Did she really think that the Lu family was like other rich men who would lose their minds after being teased by a woman? As she thought about it, Tong Sanyang couldn't help but recall a scene from many years ago. Even after so many years, those memories hadn't faded. She remembered the scene where the second Lang Jun had ordered his servants to be beaten to death. It was a different scene with a different protagonist, but it was all the same bloody scene. When the late madam passed away, Master followed the rules of etiquette. After the deadline, the old lady secretly sent a few girls who looked similar to the late madam, hoping that they could ease the grief in Master's heart and persuade him to remarry as soon as possible. And the result? Among them, the one who resembled the late wife was willing to throw away her pride. She took off all her clothes and wrapped herself in a thin quilt to seduce him. She even reached out to Second Langjun, which caused Second Langjun, who was already weak, to fall ill and almost die. What happened to the maid in the end? Didn't the old master order people to cut off his entire face and beat him to death? Everyone said that the second son of the Lu family, Lu Shi, was gentle and affectionate, as if he would never get angry. But who knew how ruthless this man could be when he decided to be? He hated the fact that the woman had seduced him with a face that resembled his late wife's. He hated the fact that she had used such a despicable method to murder his second Langjun. After the incident, he ordered his men to cut off her face and remove the thin quilt that had been covering her body. He wanted her to be beaten to death naked in the main courtyard. At the time, Tong Sanyong was still young, but she had witnessed that scene with all the maids in the estate. It had become a nightmare to this day. Fortunately, the old madam had arrived in time and was skillful enough to prevent Lu Shi's reputation from being cruel and heartless. After that incident, no one in the entire Lu family had the guts to seduce Lu Shi. Every single one of them wished that they could not wear any makeup. They chose the most mature clothes, and they could not look at the head of the house with their eyes above their necks. All those pretentious actions and expressions of wanting to say something had to be put away. After all, no one would complain about living too long. Tong Sanyong's face was cold and hard. Her eyes seemed to be dripping with ice. Tong Sanyong had left in a hurry, so she did not realize that their conversation had fallen into the ears of a third person. That person was none other than Jiang Pingji. She was sitting on a fake mountain, dressed in a comfortable brown dress. She swung her legs and looked in that direction with a faint smile on her face. She had originally wanted to find a quiet place to meditate and try to pick up where she had left off. Perhaps it was because of the rich experience from her previous life, but Jiang Pingji meditated for the first time in her life. She quickly got on the right track. A wisp of ethereal mental strength surrounded her body and greatly enhanced her five senses. She entered a mysterious state of spiritual emptiness. Although the previous fusion of martial strength was a bit of a cheat, the benefits were not limited to a little increase in martial strength. Not only did her martial strength recover a little, but her mental strength also recovered a lot. She had barely reached the baseline of mental training. The scientific name for mental training was meditation and meditation. It was a training method that the Federation had developed after they entered the interstellar era. When one's mental strength reached a certain level, it could trigger a qualitative change in the body's genes and further strengthen the body. Jiang Pingji did not expect to hear the conversation between Tong Sanyong and the little servant girl. The content of the conversation made her not know whether to laugh or cry. Lu Shi was indeed very young in her era, but in this era he was old enough to be a grandfather. Yes, if Lu Lanting's eldest brother had not died young, he would have been old enough to find a wife and have children. In other words, Lu Shi was already half a step into the grandfather's generation. Jiang Pingji watched Tong Sanyong's silhouette as she left. She saw the angry expression on the little servant girl's face. Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a faint smile. No matter the era, power is the most attractive thing a man has. Jumping off the fake mountain, Jiang Pingji went straight to her courtyard. She was greeted by Taksha's indignant face. "Langjun, why did you go out in this outfit?" Taksha was holding a pine green leather cloak in her arms. It was embroidered with delicate cloud patterns and pine leaves. Seeing that the missing Jiang Pingji had returned, she quickly went forward to put it on her. "This is not what you should wear." Jiang Pingji did not mind. "Clothes are made for people to wear. Why should I wear them?" Taksha did not raise her head. "This is not suitable for Langjun." Jiang Pingji did not refute. Instead, she obediently put on the clothes that Taksha handed to her. Even though the clothes covered her tightly and the cloak on the outside was spacious and the sleeves fluttered when the wind blew, it still could not hide the fact that there was wind underneath. Once again she began to miss the second ruler in her previous life. Why couldn't Taksha prepare clothes for her that were not open? Her mother, a time traveler, had been in this world for so many years. Couldn't she lead the fashion and recommend clothes for others? Jiang Pingji remained expressionless. She changed into the clothes that Taksha thought suited her status. The wide sleeves made it easy for her to go for a walk. After confirming that there were no problems, she let the system open the streaming room. In less than 2 seconds the screen was filled with bullet screens that blinded her. Zhuangxi Weiguan, damn, I finally made it in. It's so hard to get a seat in this streaming room. Changqiang Dong Dong, same to the previous post. It took me more than 2 hours to get a seat and see the legendary streamer. Chapter 90. Fatty Big C, bro, it's good enough to get it. Can you imagine 8 people in a dorm watching the stream together? Paydaxing, speaking of which, the host's streaming room is too strange. There's a limit of 3,000 people. There are too many monks and not enough porridge. I wonder if there are some rich people lurking around and giving the host a few 9-5 supremes to increase the limit. Hit me if you don't agree, it's useless. The host's streaming room is very strange. It's different from the rules of streaming apps. Jiang Pingji looked at the complaints and discussions on the screen. She raised her eyebrows and sent a bullet screen. Host V, don't worry everyone. The live streaming room limit has been put on the agenda. She posted the content of the semi-interactive and fully interactive streaming modes. Host V, I'm now collecting the content of the fully interactive streaming mode. You can tag whatever you want to see and I'll select the content to vote for. As for the content of the semi-interactive streaming mode, I'll open it when there's a suitable opportunity. As there was a new group of viewers in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji simply explained in detail what happened in the streaming room. Fatty Big C, I want to see the host go to a brothel. I heard there are many high-quality girls in this room. Maybe it was because of the culture of modern society, many people were more sensitive to these special industries and were more curious about them. Fatty Big C started the discussion, and the screen was filled with comments about visiting a brothel and looking at girls. Paydaxing, that's not right. I heard the host is a girl. Are you guys crazy to let a girl go to a brothel in ancient times? There are all sorts of people there. If the host gets bullied, will you take responsibility? What a bunch of troublemakers. There were some who wanted to cause trouble and there were also some righteous young men. Apart from Paydaxing, there was also a small group of viewers who supported him. After all, women in ancient times were very particular about their reputation. If an unmarried girl went to a brothel, even if nothing happened, her reputation would be ruined. Jiang Pingji quietly watched the fun and didn't get involved. However, she also wanted to go. After all, there were many beautiful girls. But Lu Shi's father probably wouldn't want to see his daughter go to a brothel. She silently looked at the bullet screen for a while, then turned her head and said to Takshu with her usual expression, "Go get Suku here." Xuanmei's eyes lit up when she heard Suku's name. She looked at Jiang Pingji with yearning. Takshu was initially reluctant. She did not have a good impression of Suku. However, when she saw Xuanmei's reaction, she frowned and immediately accepted the task. The place where Suku lived was not far from Jiang Pingji's courtyard. Takshu was efficient. She quickly brought him over. "Let's go," Jiang Pingji said to Suku. It was the first official training for the servants. She felt that it would be better for her to be there to hold the fort. Suku's small stature was not threatening at all. It was different from the day before. Other than Jiang Pingji's horse carriage, there were 2 bullock carts with heavy loads following behind. Seeing this, Suku could not help but ask suspiciously, "Langjun, what are you doing?" Jiang Pingji gave a simple explanation. "Since we're going to train, we can't lack the necessary items. These are prepared for their training. I also asked the sewing room to make a lot of sandbags, but the cloth is rough and normal sand will seep out easily, so I chose dry clay." Suku tilted his head and thought about the pattern Jiang Pingji had drawn. He thought about the large amount of wood he had bought the day before. "The wood you bought yesterday was also for the training?" Jiang Pingji did not hide it. "Yes. It's just that those items are more delicate. The carpenter said it would take 10 days to half a month to produce the finished products. It's still a problem if they can't be used. If they can't be used, we need to find more suitable wood or substitutes." Suku recalled the strange pattern he had seen. He was a little confused. "I heard that the Lu's woodworking workshop is one of the best in Hejian County. The craftsmen there are also skilled and experienced. I wonder what it is that even they have to spend so much effort on?" Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him. She said strangely, "Have you ever seen a servant patrolling the courtyard empty-handed? Since the carpenters were rushing to make them, they were naturally weapons that were more convenient to use." Suku's face changed. "Privately made weapons? Of course not. It's just a crossbow that I improved. Can be used for hunting. Your previous words have reminded me that not everyone has the strength to draw a heavy bow. Even a strong man, if he doesn't eat his fill for a long time, he won't even be able to stand properly, let alone shoot an arrow. Not everyone has the ability to shoot from 100 steps away. If you want to achieve this, you need to train hard for a long time. The efficiency is too low." She did not elaborate, but Suku understood the hidden meaning in her words. Was his Lang Jun hinting that the crossbow she had asked the craftsman to rush to make could easily shoot a crossbow for those who lacked strength and eyesight? If there really is such a weapon, Lang Jun should choose the craftsman well in case the secret is leaked. Suku looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil. Was there really such a magical thing in the world? Jiang Pingji nodded her head. Chapter 91. These people can be the first group leaders. If they don't make the cut, we'll eliminate them in the next selection test. Suku took the list, glanced at it and remembered it. Lang Jun, are you really going to lead them to kill the bandits after the training? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and her eyes were sharp. Of course. Do you think I'm joking? Suku shook his head. He had seen Jiang Pingji's methods, so he didn't think she was the kind of person who would joke. I don't mean that. It's just that most of the bandits around Hejian County are hiding in the deep mountains and it's hard to find them. If we get entangled with them, I'm afraid we'll be at a disadvantage. Although he didn't say it directly, Suku wasn't optimistic about it. Let's not talk about that. Those bandits are all desperados. They have nothing to worry about, so they're naturally cruel and bloodthirsty. But those servants don't have the heart to die. It was said that the unreasonable were afraid of the reckless. A group of servants who had no experience in killing had little chance of winning against the bloodthirsty bandits. There's always a first time for everything. What's so scary about killing? Jiang Pingji glanced at Suku. Although he was young and skinny, he had chopped people to death with a hatchet. Since she said so, it was obvious how determined she was. Suku wouldn't ask for a rebuff and continued to persuade her. The training process and specific programs were written in detail in the booklet. They were all basic physical training, so it wasn't difficult to do. Suku gathered everyone together. First, he picked out a few corporals, and then he divided the rest of the servants into groups. The whole process was quiet. The group of people were as obedient as little chicks, waiting for their mother hen to assign tasks. Surprisingly, no one dared to make a sound and cause trouble. What a joke. Did they dare to make a sound? Yesterday, the fiend who single-handedly defeated more than 10 of them was staring at them from the side. Who would want to live too long? Thinking about the scene from the day before, the places where Jiang Pingji beat them still hurt. Because the training environment was too simple, the training programs were naturally not fancy, so basic physical training programs were very common. O Shui Yin Feng Mian, it feels like an ancient military training? Patrick Starr. This is much more difficult than military training. When I was in school, military training was either running or walking in a square formation. It was actually quite easy. As for these people, after a period of training, they would be sent to suppress bandits. If they were not careful, they would lose their lives. Fatty Big C. I just finished military training a month ago. It's much easier than them. Full mouth of dog food. But is this training useful? Why did it feel so unreliable? Tudu Feichio. It can't be like that. How can the host be so unreliable? How could Jiang Pingji not have considered these things that even the livestream viewers knew? Pure physical training could only make these servants stronger and stronger, but it was not enough to fight the bandits to the death with just this. After all, they were the embryonic form of an orderly troop, not a pile of loose sand that fought on their own. They didn't need powerful individual combat abilities, but they needed to learn how to cooperate in small groups. Running 10,000 meters 3 times a day doesn't mean that you can finish it with all your might. This method is the dumbest. You will run out of energy one by one, and when you reach the finish line, you will be too tired to get up. Let's say you are a speedy troop that received orders to support a battlefield. If you follow this method, even if you arrive in time, you will be a tired troop with no combat ability. Jiang Pingji watched these people run around several ridges for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Even though they were panting from exhaustion and their legs felt like they were filled with lead, none of them completed the task. She frowned under the sun, and Suku was afraid that she would be angry. Although he knew that Jiang Pingji's words made sense, Suku felt that her standards were too high. He tried to persuade her. Lang Jun, don't be angry. After all, these people are training for the first time. They will not be used to it. If we give them some time, I think. Xiaoyu, this has nothing to do with whether they are used to it or not. I know what you want to say. They are all bought by the broker house, so their physical condition is not as good as those strong men who have been farming for a long time. Because they don't eat much rice, their strength is not as good as others, so it is reasonable that they can't finish the prescribed distance. But I want to say that this is not correct because they don't know how to run. It would be strange if they could last 10,000 meters if they sped up from the beginning. Jiang Pengji tried to explain in words that everyone could understand. Long-distance running not only tests physical strength and endurance, but also other things. Blindly running will only waste the body's energy. The best situation is to maintain a uniform speed and use it reasonably. Not only that, but they also have to learn how to maintain a reasonable breathing rhythm while running. That kind of rapid breathing will make people more tired. And the range of running, like that person who wanted to swing his arm to the sky, is ridiculously wrong. More importantly, the running posture was too eye-catching. This was the most basic physical training. There would be all kinds of weight-bearing events in the future, and it would be even more tiring. Looking at these guys, there was only one word in Jiang Pingji's mind: chicken. Thinking back, even when she was selected to be trained in a low-level military school when she was still a turnip, the training intensity was more than 10 times higher than these people. She steadily withstood it. These men were all like soft-footed shrimps. They couldn't even compete with her when she was 5 or 6 years old. Chicken. If you don't train well now, you will have no bones left in the future. Jiang Pingji sneered and concluded. Su Ku, who was beside her, was as silent as a chicken, and he did not try to persuade her. He understood that Jiang Pingji did not use the standard of a normal servant to ask these people, but the standard of a tiger, wolf, and bear soldier. As the saying goes, speed is the most important thing in war. For an army, they could easily travel hundreds of miles in a day. It was okay to rush to help or to launch a surprise attack. If they were in such a state, they would not be able to arrive in time even if they risked their lives. When the time came, the people and horses would be exhausted, and they would be ambushed by the enemy who was waiting for them. Of course, this once again proved how ambitious his Lang Jun was. She really wanted to cause trouble. One by one get up. Lying on the ground and panting like dogs. Don't you think it's ugly? Jiang Pingji looked at them disdainfully and chased them up from the ground like she was chasing ducks. Her movements were not gentle at all. Looking at these people getting up in 2s and 3s, although their faces were ugly, they were not at their limit. She was slightly satisfied. When they are done with their training, I will buy some younger ones. The old will guide the new. That way your task will be lighter. Chapter 92. Novel Network to provide you with exciting novel reading. Since it was just the beginning, the training was very basic. There was physical training in the morning and a 10,000-meter run 3 times a day. In the afternoon, they practiced the spear made from a wooden stick. They practiced the basic movements of blocking, holding, stabbing, wrapping, circling, pouncing, pointing, and pushing. She knew about the spear because she had been to the Museum of Ancient Times in her previous life. The history of the evolution of weapons in the military school also briefly described the evolution and development of weapons in the ancient times, modern times, ancient times, and modern times. Su Ku held the spear that the carpentry workshop had rushed to make. He weighed it in his hand and suddenly thrust it forward. It looked quite imposing. I couldn't tell. You look as weak as a chicken, but when you play with a spear you have quite a bit of power. Su Ku was speechless. Chicken? Aha, so that's how Lang Jun sees him? Tao Wu put away the spear. Su Ku looked like he had nothing left to live for. Lang Jun, I'm sorry. Jiang Pingji smiled without saying a word. She raised her hand and pointed at the other wooden spear. The spear bounced up and jumped into Jiang Pingji's palm. She smiled and said, Do you want to loosen your muscles and bones? Su Ku was stunned. Before he could understand what she meant, a wooden spear came at him. He subconsciously blocked it with the body of the spear, but he found that Jiang Pingji did not use much strength. It looked like she was just fooling around. With this in mind, Su Ku felt a little more confident. If that's the case, Lang Jun, please come. The audience watching the live stream found that Su Ku could use the wooden spear so skillfully. His moves were simple and clean, which greatly overturned the impression of a weak scholar they had in their minds. That skill, that posture. How did he look like a weak chicken? In fact, the 6 arts of a gentleman included etiquette, music, archery, imperial carriage, calligraphy, and mathematics. Many scholars could pick up a pen and write poems, ride a horse and play with a spear and shoot arrows, and more or less had some martial arts. Even though most of them were just for show, they looked good but were useless. However, it didn't matter if he was just for show or not. For Jiang Pingji, it didn't make much of a difference. They fought for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Su Ku's legs were weak, his eyes were dizzy, his arms were swollen, his palms were bleeding from the rough wooden spear, and his whole body was drenched in sweat. But Jiang Pingji still looked like nothing had happened. Even her breathing was not irregular and her forehead was dry. Young people still need to train. His arms are as soft as noodles. This won't do. She smiled and stabbed the wooden spear into the ground. Like a knife cutting through tofu, half of the spear entered the ground. I'm not talented, but Lang Jun is brave. Suku cupped his hands and smiled bitterly. He was better at using his brain, and this kind of activity almost made him sprain his waist. As for Jiang Pingji's teasing, he just ignored it and didn't take it to heart. You're still young, so you need to train more. I'm weak and have a lot of problems. I can't stay idle. If you follow me, you really have to train hard. Otherwise, I'm afraid you'll get tired. Jiang Pingji smiled and encouraged him. Literature can bring peace to the world, and martial arts can bring peace to the world. Just thinking about it makes my blood boil. Xiaoyu, if you're willing, you can train with these people. She could see that Suku did have some skills. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste them? I was young and ignorant. I was a ranger for a period of time. Later I met my teacher and was enlightened. That's why I became obsessed with the sage's books. Every man had the dream of being a great hero. He would help the weak and rob from the rich to help the poor. Suku was no exception. He had a period of chunibyu, but in the end he put down his sword and picked up his brush to study quietly. He wanted to be a good son who could make his mother feel at ease. It was a pity that his mother died young before she could enjoy her son's filial piety for a few years. Jiang Pingji tilted her head and complained, "Young and ignorant? You make it sound like you're very mature now." Suku was speechless. On the other side, a friend who was watching the live stream gave Suku an emoji. Cafeteria Dafinanti, "Young Suku Langjun, I'm telling you, you'll lose your baby if you keep this up." Jiang Pingji glanced at it and said to Suku with a smile, "Were you thinking that if I continued to tease you, you'd throw a tantrum?" Suku blushed and said awkwardly, "Langjun, please don't joke around." Jiang Pingji said to him seriously, "Actually, you can throw a tantrum. I can tolerate it. A little temper makes you cuter." In her eyes, Suku was a teenager who threw a tantrum. It was fine for him to be stubborn once in a while. Suku was silent. How should he, as a page boy, deal with his Langjun, who was 5 years younger than him, rudely throwing a tantrum in front of him? "Hurry. I'm waiting online." Reality proved that a rabbit would bite when it was anxious, and Suku would choke when he was anxious. "Langjun, you should save your sweet words for the girls in Langlang Alley." After saying that, Suku cupped his hands and bowed, then flicked his sleeves and left. He could not vent his anger on Jiang Pingji, but it was not a problem for him to torment the servants. The more he understood, the more he felt that the image of the noble son in his mind was crumbling. Of course, it would not take long for him to realize that it was not the noble son who crumbled, but his weird Langjun. Tisk tsk. Speaking of looks, the girls in Langlang Alley may not be as elegant as Xiaoyu. Jiang Pingji lowered her voice to make sure that Suku, who was swinging his sleeves, could hear her. Then Jiang Pingji saw him stumble and miss his footing. He rolled down the ridge of the field. The audience in the streaming room felt sorry for Suku when he couldn't help teasing her. Canteen Dafinanti, "Streamer, you are so evil. You even bully a cute kid like Suko. I can't bear to see it. She's so adorable, so beautiful, how could you be so cruel to her?" I really wanted to rush out of the screen and hug him. "Badeo Zhangzi, I've never seen such an evil streamer. Look, you scared him." Sakeda too, "People in ancient times are very serious. If you do that, he may hate you. Be careful, he might become evil." Xian, "Haha, I'm looking forward to Suku's evil appearance. Then he will fall in love with the heartless streamer." Jiang Pingji ignored the teasing comments on the screen. She walked to the ridge of the field, squatted down and carried Suku, who was lying on the ground, on her back. Suku was shocked by her actions again. His body was obviously stiff and his muscles were tense. "You're so careless even when you're walking." Fortunately, the ridge is low and has been carefully cleaned by the tenant farmers. There aren't any big rocks. Otherwise you might have broken a leg and disfigured yourself. Jiang Pingji was carrying him on her back, but her steps were light and vigorous. Suku finally recovered from the shock. He did not know where to put his hands and his face was full of embarrassment. Hearing Jiang Pingji's accusation, Suku felt a sense of helplessness. Chapter 93. Am I wrong to say that you're good-looking? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and said matter-of-factly, "It's something to be proud of if you're good-looking. It means that your appearance is much better than the average person." Love go, small talk, net, cause Suku could neither swallow nor spit it out. His originally pale face turned purple from the suffocation. That wasn't a compliment. She was flirting with him. I'll take you to Lang Lang Alley when I'm free. I don't want you to say that I'm flirting with you. She was always wrong. Suku was speechless. Jiang Pingji continued, but with your looks, I don't know if you're playing with them or if they're playing with you. Suku was speechless. Could she stop talking about Lang Lang Alley? She was going to be traumatized. Cafeteria Daffinanti? Then it must be those coquettish bitches playing with Suku. You'll be at a disadvantage if you go there. Even though the viewers in the streaming room were a bit weird, they had a normal aesthetic sense. They all felt that Suku would be at a disadvantage if he went to Lang Lang Alley. Thinking of the innocent young Suku falling into a group of coquettish cheese and being tossed and turned by them, he started to cry pitifully. At that moment, howls and howls could be heard from all directions in the livestream room. Xian, has the streamer decided to go to a brothel? You have to let me know when you're going to stream. Jiang Pingji promised, but she never expected that she would go to Lang Lang Alley under such circumstances. Love go small talk netku, I just sprained my ankle. I'll be fine after a few days of rest and some medicine. Jiang Pingji was not a doctor, but she was constantly injured, both internally and externally. After a long period of time she could be considered a doctor. Moreover, there were compulsory courses in the military school for first aid. Jiang Pingji had learned some, so it was not a problem for her to deal with such minor injuries. Langjun, you know medicine? Suku calmed down a lot, and his impression of Jiang Pingji was renewed. What lofty! What great talent! What wise lord! They were all the result of his blind judgment. She hated herself for being blind at that time. Why did she feel that this Langjun in front of her was a wise ruler? Jiang Pingji lied without blinking. My mother has been bedridden all year round. How can I be at ease? In his spare time he had read some medical books and learned some superficial techniques and superficial knowledge. He couldn't be considered to be an expert in medicine. Speaking of which, I thought of something important. Suku was a very serious young man. Once serious business was brought up, his attention was involuntarily diverted. What is it? I took a look at their training today. These people really know how to endure hardship. They didn't cut corners during training, nor did they play tricks. It's just that I used too much force. If I don't take a good rest, I'm afraid I won't even be able to get up tomorrow, let alone train. Jiang Pingji could not help but think of her first days in a low-level military school in her previous life. It was tiring but fulfilling. After training, she had a special muscle-soothing nutrient solution, which was good for relieving fatigue and maintaining her training condition. However, the medical technology in this era was so backward that she couldn't count on nutrient solutions. She couldn't even use them herself, so she could only use another method instead. Moreover, it had to be more in line with this era and not too scary. Suku thought back to those people's training. After a day of torment they were really exhausted. When they had a big pot to eat they were like hungry wolves. They fought for food faster than anyone else, as if they were afraid that they would not have enough to eat. Training consumed a lot of energy. Langjun, do you have a way to deal with it? Jiang Pingji said, of course I do. I'll go back and draw a picture for you. Just follow it. The method she was talking about was the most basic massage. Almost all the students in the military school knew the basic techniques. Low-level military schools were very common. Most of the students there were ordinary people. Not everyone had the luxury of using nutrient solutions to relieve the stress of training. If Jiang Pingji had not been born with high numbers and potential, she would not have been lucky enough to be chosen as the focus of training. Of course, if she wanted to maximize the benefits, it was best to condense her mental strength on her fingertips to stimulate the activity of the muscles. However, mental strength was a mysterious thing. If she said it out loud, people might mistake it as nonsense. Jiang Pingji spent some time to draw a few simple pictures. She added some words to make sure that Suku could understand. Suku took the pictures and looked at them. His expression softened a little. He said, Langjun, thank you. It seemed that Langjun was quite reliable. While Jiang Pingji was drawing, there were also some viewers who were more careful. They used their phones or computers to record and take pictures. They wanted to try it out after taking a shower at night to see how it worked. Because of Jiang Pingji's arrangement, Suku lived in the farm during the early stages of training. He did not have to go back to the loos at night. If he needed to borrow any books he could go back. All in all, except for the occasional unreliability of Langjun, the loos were treated very well. Suku tried to use his strength and found that his sprained foot did not hurt anymore. He stood up and sent her back. Before leaving, Jiang Pingji suddenly stopped and looked at Suku. Her gaze made Suku break out in cold sweat. Langjun? Remember one thing. You are now my servant, Jiang Pingji said with an inexplicable meaning. Jiang Pingji said with an inexplicable meaning, I'll let it go for today. From tomorrow onwards, remember this well. Su Ke's eyes were filled with suspicion. Then he suddenly understood and his face turned pale. Don't be so afraid. If you have anything to say, just tell him directly. He won't not understand. Jiang Pingji curled her lips, slapped the sandalwood fan in her hand, and closed it with a swoosh. That night, Su Ke smiled bitterly at the brush and ink on the long table. After thinking for a while, he picked up the brush and put it on the bamboo paper. As the servant of the second Langjun of the Lus, he received a fixed amount of brush, ink and bamboo paper, in addition to the money he received every month. When the gods fight, the mortals suffer. It's not a good thing to be between the father and the son. But Langjun is right. Instead of suffering from both sides, it was better to stand firmly on one side. After Su Ke finished writing, he put the bamboo paper on the candle to warm it. When the ink was dry, he rolled it into a roll and walked to the porch. He waved at the sky. Not long after, a snow-white pigeon fluttered its wings and landed on his arm. It had a small bamboo tube tied to its claw. It was a messenger pigeon from Zhongzhou in the hinterland of the Central Plains to Dongqing. After a few years of development in Dongqing, as long as the family was wealthy, they would raise and train a few pigeons to send messages. Coo-coo, Lu Shi heard the pigeons cry. He got up and picked up the pigeon. He took out the bamboo paper and read it quickly. After a long time, he could not help but laugh. Chapter 94. Jiang Pingji returned to the Lus. As soon as she stepped through the gate, the system beeped and a mission letter popped up. System. Dear host Jiang Pingji, the results of the preliminary selection for your first fully interactive live stream have been released. The topic with the most votes is I'm visiting a brothel in ancient times. Please complete the live stream within 3 days. It was an automatic notification from the system. Jiang Pingji glanced at it and then threw it into the system's trash can. I'm indeed visiting a brothel. Sure enough, this kind of thing always attracts people's curiosity. Jiang Pingji held her forehead. She had lost all hope for the viewers who did not go offline. She did not want a live stream anymore. If she blushed and drew a level advancement card, wouldn't that mean that her experience would become 10,000? The system said quietly, actually I want to go too. Jiang Pingji was speechless. A system that only had data and no substance. Why would it want to go to a brothel? It was incompetent. It was still early for her to return to the Lu residence. She first went to her courtyard to freshen up. Although she did not sweat much, she was still somewhat dirty after shuttling back and forth in the fields for a long time. Moreover, she still had to endure Taksha's nagging. Langjun, you are so precious. You can just leave everything to Su Ke. You have to do it yourself. That's great. I've never seen Langjun look so dirty. 2 of his handkerchiefs are dirty. Jiang Pingji knew very well that she could not argue with the woman at this time, because no matter how reasonable she was, it would be unreasonable. Silence was the best comfort. As expected, Taksha felt that Jiang Pingji's attitude was good. She finally stopped nagging and closed her mouth. At that moment, Jiang Pingji did not expect Su Ke to have the guts to play a trick on her. Jiang Pingji accompanied Lu Shi and Madame Hu for dinner. She was in a good mood and ate 2 more bowls of rice. She ate more than Lu Shi and Madame Hu combined, but she put down her chopsticks at the same time as them. Lanting is still growing. Ask the kitchen to make 2 more meat dishes. Lu Shi had never had a good appetite, but when he looked at his daughter's face, he could eat a bowl of rice without stopping. Madame Hu, who knew him very well, secretly rolled her eyes. She couldn't be bothered to maintain her usual elegant demeanor. Madame Hu did not want to be known as someone who mistreated the late wife's son. She did not want to remind Lu Shi that he was sitting next to his daughter and not his son. If she continued to feed him without restraint, he would be so fat that he would be slaughtered by the end of the year. Jiang Pingji had never had the concept of gaining weight. To her, the food she ate would only become firm muscles, not fat. After shyly thanking Lu Shi, Jiang Pingji resumed her posture of looking down and wondering when Lu Shi would speak. It wasn't that she didn't know that Lu Shi always asked about her life through Su Ke. His original intention was to care about her and nothing else. His original intention was not bad. She actually quite enjoyed this kind of concern. But Jiang Pingji was rational. She knew that she could not enjoy it for long. If she did not stop it soon, it would one day become a malignant tumor and become the root of the rift between father and son. Even the most intimate people had to maintain a certain distance, especially between a father and a son. The former had the natural responsibility to raise the latter. She had a very strong personality. She couldn't stand other people telling her what to do for no reason. She also couldn't accept other people trying to control her life all the time. It was like a steel cage imprisoning her in a corner of the world, even if that person was Lu Shi. She could enjoy it if it happened once or twice, but she could not guarantee that she would not fall out with him. So to prevent the worst from happening, it was better to make things clear as soon as possible. If Lu Shi wanted to know something, he could ask her directly instead of going through a third party. But she did not expect Lu Shi to not play by the rules. He did not feel embarrassed at all when he confessed that he knew about his daughter through Su Ku. What he said made Jiang Pingji want to kneel in front of him. Su Ku sent me a messenger pigeon. He said that you were curious about Lang Lang Alley. It was dessert time for the family. It was also a time to talk and cultivate their relationship. The atmosphere was not as dull as it was during dinner. Jiang Pingji asked, "What?" Madame Hu glared at Lu Shi. She looked like she would strangle him if he said another word. "Yes, I did," Jiang Pingji admitted. She was not only curious, but she also planned to go to the alley the next day. "But why did you bring this up all of a sudden, father?" She looked at Madame Hu and motioned for Lu Shi to calm down. Talking about brothels with his son in front of his concubine? Was he not afraid of being beaten to death? However, Lu Shi was too cunning. How could he betray Su Ku? "You are not young anymore. There are some things that you should know." Lu Shi raised his eyebrows at her suggestively. Jiang Pingji almost choked on the tea she was holding in her mouth. Before she could cough, Madame Hu raised her hand and flipped the table in front of her into the air. It fell to the ground with a loud crash. Madame Hu gritted her teeth and shouted at Lu Shi, "Lu Zhongqing." Lu Shi did not have the slightest idea that his backyard was in trouble. Instead, he smiled gently. "Cousin, do you want to go too?" Jiang Pingji was speechless. Not only did he talk about brothels in front of his concubine, he even asked if she wanted to go with him. Jiang Pingji wanted to kneel in front of her. "Be careful, Sister Amin might come and strangle you to death tonight." "You're really?" Madame Hu's face turned red with anger. She was so angry, but Lu Shi was still smiling calmly. He was not affected in the slightest. Madame Hu flung her sleeves angrily and strode out of the main courtyard. "That's her temper. Don't be scared." Lu Shi regained his gentle and serious look. "It's normal for someone your age to be curious about that kind of place. Instead of waiting for you to go there quietly and run into something you can't handle, it's better for me to bring you there and broaden your horizons. Once you see it with your own eyes, you won't be curious anymore." Jiang Pingji was speechless. It was a good reason, but why did she feel that something was wrong? "Father, you don't seem surprised at all." Jiang Pingji swore that it was not Lu Shi's first time going to that kind of place. It was a lie to say that he loved Gu Min. "I used to be your age. How could I not know?" Lu Shi was very open-minded. His eyes were clear and gentle. "By the way, your mother was the one who encouraged me to go there for the first time." Jiang Pingji was speechless. Chapter 95. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Lu Shi said gently, "The harmony of yin and yang is the right thing to do. What's there to be shy about?" When a teenager, or girl, reaches a certain age, their curiosity toward the opposite sex will reach a high level. It's as if there's a soft claw scratching at their hearts. Stopping them with righteous words or reprimanding them for a long time will only stimulate their rebellious mentality. Jiang Pingji was speechless. She was afraid that if she said a few more words, her father would turn back to his room and toss her 2 paintings of avoiding fire. Thinking about that beautiful scene was too painful for her eyes. She didn't dare to look at it. "Speaking of which, father, have you forgotten that you are raising a daughter, not a son?" Lu Shi made the decision and said, "There's no time like the present. Let's do it today." Jiang Pingji maintained a calm expression on her face, but she was already cursing the system in her heart. "I feel like I've come to a pirated ancient era. How can someone like Lu Shi survive in such an environment?" The system pretended to be dead again. After all, Gu Min's appearance in this era was inseparable from it. "Forget it. Let's do it tonight. I don't want to have to make a trip in the future." The audience in the streaming room was surprised to find that the streaming room, which had been closed for less than 2 hours, was back up again. There was also an option to vote on audience satisfaction. The subtitle of the streaming room was, "A Night at a Brothel in the Ancient Era?" Awesome streamer. Pudding is not pudding, what the F***CK. It's rare for me to come in, but I'm so lucky to have such an important stream. The streaming room had a maximum audience of 3,000, but there were many who wanted to watch the stream. Many people watched Jiang Pingji stream through videos. Even though they had never entered the streaming room, Jiang Pingji's unique style left a deep impression on them. Peacock Southeast flies. Is the streamer going to have sex with a human? Will it be banned? Last time, there was a streamer on the roasted fish platform who broadcast the process of making a human. However, it wasn't long before it was banned by the management. In the end, she was even called over by the police for tea. Liang Feng Yoxing, come on, the streaming room is amazing. I have a relative who works on the grilled fish platform. He told me that although the host's room number can be found, they don't have the data at all, so they can't block it. Chiyue Wubian? In other words, if the streamer really wants to put on a big show, we can also watch as much as we want? Dolly Buting, no way, the host looks like she's still underage. What's so good about her figure? She's just a frying pan. Now, previous user, if you keep talking like this, the host might go crazy and show you what it means to be sliced into 1,000 pieces. It's definitely bloody and violent. You might even wet your pants. The host was a woman. If she wanted to have sex, she would have gone to a small brothel, not a brothel. Daming Hao Nan, when it comes to sanitary napkins, you think of women's menstruation. When it comes to brothels, you think of men and women having sex. Is your brain filled with perverted trash? Could their thoughts be a little more pure? This was clearly a very serious and inspiring live broadcast room. Because of the sudden start of the live broadcast, many old viewers were unable to squeeze in. 90% of the live broadcast room were unfamiliar faces, and the atmosphere became a little impetuous. Jiang Pengji took a look and her expression became colder and colder. There would always be people who did not learn their lesson. It was okay to joke, but it depended on who the person was joking with. If it was just a stranger, the joke would not be a joke. It would be vulgar and vulgar. Xian, am I the only one who noticed that the host's father is in the carriage? Excuse me? Many viewers were dumbfounded. What was going on? Langlang Alley was located on a street near the market in Hejian County. It was very far away from the Lu residence, Sanshu Street. Jiang Pingji used the fan to slightly open the curtain of the carriage. The sky outside had already turned dark, but both sides of the street were filled with red lights, which made the night look bright. A gust of wind mixed with many fragrances blew over, which made Jiang Pingji, whose 5 senses were very sensitive, suffer. This is Langlang Alley? It looks so lively. Unlike the other countries, Dongqing did not have a curfew. Therefore, every night, the streets nearby were insanely lively. Here, even the air was thick with a romantic atmosphere. It seemed to have become the best catalyst. However, for Jiang Pingji, the suffering was greater than the enjoyment. What's more, the woman she glanced at was not very good looking. Bad review. Lu Shi sat up straight with a smile on his face. Of course not. Lu Shi explained, Langlang Alley was built at the beginning of the Xia dynasty. It has always been divided into 1 pavilion for courtyards and 12 palaces. It has been passed down since then and it has lasted for hundreds of years. In the Great Xia dynasty, many high-ranking officials and nobles are willing to spend a fortune just for a smile from a beauty in Langlang Alley. Even though it's a brothel, it's still a rare place of elegance. Those who aren't from prominent families can't enter. Sounds different from what I imagined. Jiang Pingji frowned. Lu Shi sneered and said disdainfully, what's the difference? Langlang Alley seems to have a high threshold, but it is just a way to raise one's value. They are indifferent to you because the value you offer them is not high enough, and what they can get is too little. It has nothing to do with other affairs. If it was still in the Xia dynasty, Langlang Alley would have been an extraordinary place. It was just a place of prostitution, but there were so many extraordinary women. But after the establishment of Dongqing, Langlang Alley became an ordinary place of prostitution. Many brothels opened along the street. That's what you see now. It is a place where ordinary men and women seek pleasure. It looks prosperous, but it is actually rotten. The carriage passed through the long street full of red lanterns and drove into an alley. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly and the smell in the air became lighter. It was neither too light nor too strong. It was like a dandelion brushing against the back of one's hand, itchy and smooth. Here we are. Jiang Pingji lifted the curtain and read the words on the plaque. Hanyan Courtyard? Shall we go in? It was more of a mansion than a courtyard. The facade was neat and tidy, and it was several times bigger than the Lu mansion. Lu Shi closed his eyes and thought for a while. He changed his mind and said, no, let's find another one. What? Jiang Pingji asked in confusion. She also asked the question that was on everyone's mind. You don't look interested at all. Although this Hanyan courtyard is a place of prostitution, the women there are all talented women who are good at music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Many patrons come to our door not for the joy of family relations, but more to drink a few cups of sake. The more advanced a brothel was, the more noble the women there were. Some of them were as good as the women of noble families. Chapter 96. Lu Shi paused and his expression turned strange. After a long time he said, Your mother calls this behavior pretentious of a beast in human clothing. Love go little say, net dubby. Chumen who come to Lang Lang Alley to seek pleasure must come from well-off families and have many wives and concubines. However, they still like to come to this kind of place. Why do you think they do so? It's not because of the women's looks but because of their talents. There were few literate women, and women who were well-read, talented, and considerate were even rarer. Those men didn't have a common language with their wives and concubines at home, and they couldn't talk for a long time. But when they came to Lang Lang Alley, they could find their soulmates and talk happily. It was more satisfying than having sex. It was hard for people who weren't of the same kind to understand. At first, Lu Shi thought it made sense, but as soon as he expressed his opinion, Gu Min scolded him. Mother, you're such a clever person. You're so insightful. Jiang Pingji agreed. Wasn't it pretentious of a beast in human clothing? If that's the case, Lang Lang Alley should be quiet. Why don't you go there, father? Lu Shi looked down and said, You like crowds. I don't think you'll find an atmosphere you like there. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Pudding is not pudding. No one knows a daughter better than her father. Father, let me give you a like. Xian, wow, the host's father is still so cute. It feels super harmonious when father and daughter get along. Especially when the host's father teases the host seriously. I can feel the host's powerlessness in the bullet screen. Chow Zhao Mu Mu, haha, the host has met her nemesis. Now, I bet on a spicy stick that the host's inner bullet screen is full of sh*t. Lu Shi picked a brothel with a large area and a lot of customers. The name was very tacky, Yingchun Brothel. Even though Lu Shi had left Hejin County for many years and no one remembered his face, his elegance coupled with his exquisite silk cloak made him stand out in the crowd. He was the kind that could be found in a sea of people at a glance. The brothel keeper's eyes lit up, and she welcomed her enthusiastically. Jiang Pingji could not help but think of the woman broker she saw in the broker house that day. Yes, please come in. The brothel keeper waved her fragrant handkerchief. Lu Shi furrowed his brows and took a step back to avoid the brothel keeper's hand. Find the prettiest woman here to serve me. I want a private room and don't be too noisy. Lu Shi's expression remained cold and indifferent. He wasn't as frivolous or joyful as other men who were looking for pleasure. The madam was puzzled, but she had been in the brothel for many years. She had good judgment. The man in front of her was obviously not here to have fun. Thus, the madam lowered her head slightly and silently met Jiang Pingji's gaze. So he was the one who was looking for pleasure. The madam instantly knew the truth. Her heavily made-up face bloomed like a flower. Don't worry, sir. In this area, everyone knows that the girls in our Yingchun house are the best. I guarantee you will enjoy yourself to the fullest. After saying that, the madam turned around and called for a skinny girl in green to lead the two to a private room. The madam looked to be in her early 30s. In the eyes of the people of this era, she was already middle-aged. However, the charm that she exuded was not something that young ladies could imitate. Her charm was still there, so Jiang Pingji watched her leave. Lu Shi looked down and asked Jiang Pingji what was wrong with his eyes. Jiang Pingji opened the sandalwood fan in her hand and used it to cover her face. Only a pair of smiling eyes could be seen. The way that Madame walks reminds me of a phrase, swaying. The corner of Lu Shi's mouth twitched. He made an "oh" sound as if he had nothing left to live for. Why did he feel that something was not right? Please follow me, Lang Jun. The girl in green was still young. She looked to be no more than 10 years old. However, after living in such a place for a long time, she had developed an extraordinary eye for people. Whether it was the way she spoke or the way she bowed, she looked very proper. Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows and suppressed her 5 senses. Only then did she feel better. The private room was not small. When the girl in green opened the door, the elegant attire that came into view was refreshing. A private room, a private room. It lives up to the word elegant. Go get someone to prepare a table of light vegetarian dishes and bring 2 pots of sake over. Jiang Pingji looked around and then sat down at the four-corner table in the middle of the private room. She leaned against the table and seemed to be enjoying herself. By the way, do you have any girls who sing for fun? Pudding is not pudding. I'll bet a spicy stick that the streamer is a veteran. Didn't you see the look of despair on her father's face? The livestream audience member said what Lucy was thinking. He was a little nervous when he saw that his daughter was familiar with the place and did not seem to have any stage fright at all. Could it be that before he came back, his daughter was already a regular customer here? Lucy could be considered calm, but he could no longer remain calm. Jiang Pingji could read the voice in Lucy's mind. She raised her hand, flipped the teacup on the table, and poured herself a cup. Father, don't overthink it. It's my first time here. Lucy was speechless. She was trying to cover it up. Before the father and daughter could further discuss the issue, the figure who was kneeling outside the door bowed slightly. Langjun, the girls are here. Jiang Pingji said boldly, come in. Then the door opened and 2 girls about 16 or 17 years old came in. The material of their clothes was comparable to that of a normal girl from a wealthy family. Behind them were 4 girls who were holding musical instruments and had their hair combed into a girl's bun. The former sat next to Jiang Pingji and Lu Shi. One was delicate and the other was bright and beautiful. The latter sat quietly in the corner of the private room. Host V, do you want to sing? In a split second, the screen was filled with all kinds of song titles that were obviously not serious at a glance. Jiang Pingji saw one of them and turned to the 4 girls. Do you know how to sing 18 Moons? Even Lu Shi could not maintain his elegant demeanor at that moment. He spat out half a mouthful of tea that he had not yet swallowed. The girls who were singing looked at each other and their cheeks turned red. Although it was a place to seek pleasure and nothing was too excessive, it was rare to see someone as upright as Jiang Pingji and Lu Shi. Jiang Pingji was still young, but Lu Shi, who was beside her, was at the age where a man's charm was at its peak. There was an indescribable sense of shame in singing that kind of flirtatious song in front of such an immortal-like person. Go and serve her. I don't need anyone else here. Lu Shi quickly recovered and slightly tidied up his messy appearance. He did not look too good. Once again, he firmly believed that it was not his daughter's first time here. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.